This is really messed up. I was in my early 20s when it happened. I was dating this girl named Chelsea who lived in a nearby town. I had to drive for 1 hour to get to her place and spent some days of the week there. We were working at the same company in a bigger city that was roughly in the middle of the way for both of us. Chelsea's town was quiet and had a lot of green around it. Several summer camps existed in the area, and as a kid, she would always spend the summer months there. After years of visiting those places, she ended up making a strong and united group of friends who grew up together. They were all in their early 20s and decided to live near each other. Some of them even worked as counselors in one of their favorite camps. They were so integrated that almost every day at least one of them would show up to have dinner at Chelsea's place or invite us to hang out somewhere in the area. Super nice and friendly people though. Within weeks, I felt as if I was really a part of it. The group had around 6 people, 4 girls including Chelsea and 2 guys, Rick and Tom. These guys were roommates and inseparable. Picture a random white dude wearing flannels, light washed jeans, and dirty Timbs. That was Rick, a super common guy. He had a daughter. Rick must have been about 23 at the time, and the little girl Emma was around 5. Her mom was a girl he met at a party. Her name was Alejandra. They hooked up and she got pregnant on the first and only night they spent together. As her parents were extremely Catholic, they insisted her pregnancy was a gift from God and made her keep it. From the outside, the situation looked super under control and healthy. Alejandra was going to college, and the girl would stay at Rick and Tom's place during the week. It's safe to say those 2 dudes were raising the kid. Rick had part-time jobs around the town and would work as a camp counselor over the summer. I knew him and the girl pretty well. I went to his apartment several times and played with the kid, and they would often visit Chelsea. After a few months, Rick left the town looking for a better job. Everybody was baffled as nobody was expecting him to leave. The girl stayed with her mother and he went to the capital of the state. The routine changed completely. Now Emma would only spend the weekends at her father's place. Her mom would drive her there. Apparently Rick was doing fine. Some months later, Tuesday morning, I was sitting in my cubicle at work when Chelsea sent me a message, which is odd. We have to talk. Meet me downstairs outside. Oh shit, I thought. What have I done? I go downstairs and she's crying uncontrollably and her makeup is all messed up. What happened? I asked. Rick's daughter is dead. He's going to jail. What? Everything after that Tuesday became extremely odd, creepy and nonsense. The crime was just so brutal and gruesome that the whole state became aware of it. Rick is taking a shower on Sunday evening, getting ready to drive his daughter back to her mom's place. The girl is playing alone and he leaves the bathroom to get his clothes. The apartment was a 1-room studio and sees Emma on the floor with a thick canvas bag around her head and lots of blood coming out of it. Desperate, he removes the bag to find his daughter's face completely disfigured and bloody. He places the bag over her head again, calls 911 and waits. That was Rick's first version of the story. He claims somebody broke into his place while he was showering and brutally murdered his little girl. Initially, the cops believed him, and even though there was not a single sign of somebody else in the scene, upon inspection of the surveillance cameras, nobody was seen breaking into his apartment and his windows were still shut. The autopsy of the body showed Rick's skin under the girl's nails and his fingerprints all over her body. Somebody strangled her and then hit her in the head several times on hard surfaces around the apartment. They found a bloody t-shirt that belonged to Rick hidden under the bed. He never pleaded guilty. However, during the trial, he changed his version to, "I don't remember what happened that night. I'm sorry." "Why didn't you remove the bag?" the police asked. "Because it was not a nice thing to see." That was his answer. Alejandra's interview that went live on television was just utterly terrifying. She claimed Rick had always been an unstable man with several mental health issues, and he would constantly bang his head on the wall when feeling distressed. Needless to say, the incident destroyed the group. Nobody could believe Rick was that monster. They paid for a lawyer, and some of them even went to court. They were all exposed by the media, and the town shunned them. Tom couldn't believe his buddy had committed such a monstrosity. He lived with the dude for years and even helped take care of the girl. The last time I heard from him, he was obsessed with the grim details of the case, trying to find evidence to release Rick from jail. Don't you guys think a violent person capable of killing his own daughter would have shown signs of his true nature before? I just never understood that. Why in the world would he do it? My last post got removed, so this is the story re-uploaded. I hope that by sharing my story, anybody going through something similar can spot the red flags sooner than I did and get themselves out of a potentially dangerous situation. I was 17 and in my senior year of high school when this story took place. I took pottery as one of my electives. In that class I met Beth, who was a junior. We became good friends instantly, and I brought her into my friend group since she was new to my school and hadn't made many friends yet. During my senior year, I was going through a lot. My mom and dad got divorced, and my mom stopped her meds and had uncontrollable mood swings and anger outbursts. She brought in a new man soon after who was an absolute lunatic. I confided in Beth during that time, and she told me I'm always welcome to stay at her house, so I don't have to be around all of that. So almost every weekend I stayed over there. This means I was around her parents from time to time, but mainly her dad since he worked from home in his office and her mom traveled a lot for work. Beth told me some pretty weird things about her parents. She said they were swingers and would occasionally bring home random couples to hook up with. She said she thought that was gross and couldn't wait to move out. I got weird vibes from her parents almost instantly, but particularly the father, who I will call Joe for the remainder of the story. The first thing I noticed was how strangely he treated Beth. Like this one time, Beth and I were in the kitchen making something to eat, and Joe came and started messing with her, almost like how two siblings play fight with each other. He would get a spatula and playfully smack her with it, and then she would get annoyed and run after him, or he'd poke her 1,000 times just to annoy her, and they would constantly play push each other. I could tell Beth was genuinely annoyed with him and got so frustrated she yelled at him to stop, but he would just laugh it off like a kid. Maybe some won't find that strange, but to me it was just plain weird. Another huge red flag involving her dad was the time Beth heard through the grapevine somebody at school was talking shit behind her back. Her dad was so invested in the drama and wanted to know everything going on. He made a literal kick account, messaging app, and told off the girl who was apparently talking crap, saying horrible things to her. It was known that the girl was assaulted her freshman year of high school, and Beth had told her father about that. When he was writing those messages, he literally told her that she deserved it, which is beyond screwed up. That was such a red flag to me, and I should have stopped going over there, but I was young and stupid. They also treated me like a daughter and did a lot for me, so I felt like I was sort of obligated to keep going there. As more and more time went on, I stayed at their house. The weirder and creepier things got, and now he started shifting over to me. I remember it being May 2016, and Beth and her parents wanted to throw me a graduation party. Or should I say Beth and her dad, because the mom was away on a business trip. They knew I was going through a lot and that this would cheer me up. I was so thankful that they were doing that for me though. The day before the party, I had to go to the dentist and get one of my molars extracted. How fun. Beth's father said he could pick me up and take me to their house after, since I would be staying overnight and having my party the next day. When he came to pick me up, we had a long drive to their house because they lived in the middle of nowhere. During the ride, Joe's son from a previous marriage, called him. After a few minutes into the conversation, Joe said, "I'm not doing too much. Just taking my name to the house and setting up the party for tomorrow. She just went to the dentist, so she got galls in her mouth and can't talk. Just how we like our women, huh, son?" And he let out the creepiest laugh. I just sat there in complete shock after hearing him say that. I mean, WTF? For the remainder of the car ride, I stayed silent. Not that I could have talked anyway, but I just wanted to get out of that car as fast as possible. We get to their house and start setting up for the party. For context, Beth and all their friends that were coming to the party were underage, but Beth's dad went crazy buying a ton of alcohol. I wasn't comfortable drinking because I had never really drank before this occasion, but I just went along with it and figured I didn't have to drink that much if I didn't want to. The next day the party happens and we're all having a good time swimming, listening and dancing to the music, eating and drinking. Joe was practically with us the whole time, handing out drinks to everybody. He was trying to include himself in our conversations and wanted to hang out with us. I thought it was so bizarre, but I tried to look past it and enjoy my time because they really put a lot into the party. Now nighttime rolls around and the majority of my friends start to leave, but a few asked if they could stay the night because they were too messed up to drive home. Beth's house had a big living room and a guest bedroom, and her sister's room was vacant since she recently had moved out. So Joe said they could all find a place to sleep. The people who stayed were basically all guys and people who were friends of our friends that heard about the party and just showed up. Some of them I had just met that day at the party. I was shocked that he let all these dudes stay over. He was so paranoid about Beth having a boyfriend or even going to prom with a guy. Yet he let these underage dudes get drunk and let them stay at the house. Now here's where things take a huge turn and got worse. The same night, I and Beth and the random dudes are all chilling in the living room, watching some movie. Joe decided to come out and sit with us like he's one of the pals. He starts talking up with the guys and out of nowhere he says, "Isn't blank, my name is Stunner?" I always say, Once she's 18, she's mine, and I'm not letting anyone else have her. Once I heard that, I was done. After I went home the next morning, I knew I had to stop going over there, which ultimately meant I couldn't be friends with Beth anymore. I felt horrible, but school was over and it was summer and I graduated. And Beth wasn't allowed to leave the house and hang out with friends since her parents were oddly strict. Yet Joe gave us all alcohol and let the guys stay the night. Makes no sense. So the only time I would be able to hang out with her is if I went back to her house, which I wasn't going to do. I was also moving to live with my grandma in another state. It was the best decision for me at that time. I told Beth and she was devastated. I was like her only friend and she was trapped alone in that house. A month after that last incident, Joe showed up at my house. He had lended my mom something and was coming to pick it up. They were outside talking for over an hour and I was trying to listen from the window. Basically, Beth told her dad I was moving and was trying to persuade my mom that I should live with them and that it would be good for me. He said they have so much room in their house and even had a car I could use. I wouldn't have to pay them anything. My mom, not knowing how creepy Joe is because I never told her, told him she would talk to me about it. I basically told my mom everything that happened with Joe and she was disgusted and told me to not go there. Who knows what would have happened if I stayed with them. Beth was going to be back in school since she was going into her senior year. Her mom was always away for work, which means I would have been alone with Joe, which absolutely terrifies me. This happened 5 years ago. The last time I heard from her was in 2017, after I had basically moved. Her sister texting me asking if I had heard from Beth. I said no, and she basically told me that Beth left home and nobody could reach her. I tried calling and texting but got no responses. They finally found Beth shortly after, and when I asked if everything was okay, she just said some minor things happened, but she's okay now. She didn't go into detail about what was going on, and it makes me wonder what happened for her to have run away from home. I just hope she's okay now and out of that house. Update on my mom. She's in a much better state of mind. She dumped that POS guy and started going back to therapy and is back on her meds. She's living her best life and I'm so proud of her. Update. Guys, I just went down a rabbit hole trying to see if Beth had a Facebook and I have some updates. She was never allowed to have social media when I was friends with her, but I saw she made an account in 2018, which is the one I found. In 2019, she got pregnant and had her baby that same year. I don't see any pictures of who the father is. It's just pictures of her holding the baby or the baby by itself. The last time she posted was early 2020, so over a year ago. It seems like she doesn't use the account anymore because she's gotten many birthday wishes and people writing on her wall, all of which she is unresponsive to. I found her mom's account since she was tagged in a photo and saw that she divorced Joe and has a new husband. I'm not sure if Beth still lives at home, although in the photos it looked like she was in a different house, so I'm hoping she moved out. As for Joe, I also saw the creep on Facebook. He's been pretty inactive too, and the last time he posted was in 2018. I wish Beth and her baby the best, and I really appreciate your guys' concerns and well wishes for her. I know this story is going to sound like BS, but this story actually happened to my cousin and me in the summer of 2018. My cousin and I live pretty close to each other in the suburbs of Detroit. We both love photography and taking long drives listening to music, so that's exactly what we did on this particular day. We drove about an hour north to a small town and found an abandoned barn that was also for sale. At the time, we didn't spot any trespassing signs, so we decided to be adventurous and go check it out. Huge mistake. The barn was in semi-decent condition, although the paint had begun to peel off. Structurally, it was pretty sound though, so I didn't feel uneasy about going in. I'm an avid urban explorer in Detroit and have been in far worse buildings. Once we got inside, we somehow ended up in the basement of this barn. I immediately was getting some bad vibes. There were a little girl's clothes, toys, and furniture littered throughout the basement of this barn. I thought it was creepy as hell, and so did my cousin. Before I continue, behind the barn was a pretty decent sized cornfield. This cornfield backed up right to the barn, so we decided to be arty and take a few pictures in the corn stalks. I snapped a few shots of my cousin, and we decided it's time to head back to the car. Walking through the first row of corn on my way back to my cousin's car, I see a vertebrae in the dirt. At this point, I stopped dead in my tracks in disbelief. Like, is this actually what I think it is? Or is this an animal bone of some kind? I start looking around and, man, there were several more. They were too big to be deer. I yell for my cousin, who was almost back to the car, and have her take a look. We both start really examining the ground, and we keep finding more and more bones. Now, for the record, I've taken a cadaver lab in human anatomy in college. So I'm very familiar with the human body. We found a fibula and fully intact femur. That's when I really started to freak the heck out. We decided to call the cops because we knew this was serious. We waited in the car for a good 15 minutes, totally freaking out until the cops arrived. Once the cops came, there were two. We all started looking through the corn and nearby trash pile. The cops, I don't think, believed us, and I distinctly remember them saying they thought it was a deer carcass. That was until I found a full rib cage in the trash pile, and they changed their tune real quick. The cops told us that they would need us to leave, and they were calling a full forensic team out to start collecting evidence. We left totally shaken up. On the way out, I did see a no trespassing sign, and I'm sure the cops did too, but if they did, they didn't care. We gave the police our information, but we never did hear anything from them. I also watched the news pretty closely for the next few weeks and didn't see anything. This was one of the creepiest things I've ever experienced. I do have a photo from the barn I'd be happy to share. Doesn't show any remains though, of course. I've quibbled with the thought of publicly sharing my story for a while now. Recently, I've arrived at a place where I think the benefit of sharing outweighs the risk. People can be so judgmental. So I'm taking a chance and just putting it out there. Maybe it will help someone. Many times I've looked back on the odd events leading up to the scariest night of my life, October 5th, 2015. I like to say that I did everything right, but honestly in hindsight I should have done more. I'm convinced that my son, who's 3.5 years old at the time, actually saved me from harm that night. I could have easily become another statistic in the crime database. Although my stalker did not hurt me physically, it took me months to get past the psychological damage. Here is my story. In May 2012, I temporarily exited the workforce following the birth of my son Chris. He was born with a physical birth defect that would require multiple corrective surgeries during his first year of life. He was also born 2.5 months early, which had complicated things further. NICUs are no fun. Chris's father, Aaron, agreed that I should stay home with our son until he was 1 year old, considering the circumstances. In May 2013, I felt comfortable enough to leave my son with a babysitter, so I went job hunting. I ended up being hired on the spot as a waitress at a small but very popular chain restaurant in my little town. Let's just say that this little diner is widely known for its waffles and leave it at that. I was hired on to work second shift, the newbie shift because it's not as busy. After 2 months, I had worked my way up to first shift. The breakfast shift is the moneymaker. By the summer of 2014, I had long built a clientele of regular customers that enjoyed my service and tipped me well. Enough for me to have a little put back in savings, which came in handy when Aaron and I broke up. It was not an amicable split at first. I ended up moving out of our apartment with Chris and renting a small 2-bedroom trailer in the same town. It was mid-November of 2014 when I first met Ryan, the man who would later stalk me. It was an abnormally slow Saturday morning shift at the diner. 2 men, one late 40s or early 50s, the other maybe early 20s, walked into the diner together and sat down in my section. They were my only customers at the time, so when the older man of the two started making small talk, I had the time. The older man introduced himself to me as Ryan, and the younger man with him was his son. Right away, by his body language and tone, I could tell Ryan was being flirtatious with me. He even cracked a cliche joke saying, "There's no way you work here because you're too pretty and you have all your teeth." Honestly, I wasn't super amused with that kind of humor. I had heard it a million times over by then, and while Ryan was decent in the looks department, I'd even venture to say semi-attractive. I was a little annoyed with being casually hit on by him. I was 25 years old at the time and much closer to his son's age. But nevertheless, I faked merriment because a happy customer equals a better tip. It's just part and parcel to the job. Suffice it to say, my fake laughing and smiling paid off, earning me a $10 tip on a $20 ticket. They were only there for 30 minutes too. Not too bad, I thought to myself. The following weekend, Ryan came back to the diner. This time, and very subsequent time thereafter, he came alone. There was nothing unusual about this interaction compared to the last. I took his order, we chit-chatted when I had time, and I kept his coffee refilled, and that was it. But apparently, he enjoyed his experience because, again, he left me a nice $12 tip on an $8 ticket. Ryan began visiting the diner every weekend from then on, up until the end of December. By then, he had started coming 2 to 3 times per week, and at this point, he really started showing an interest in getting to know me. Now, that's not something unusual per se. I had some other regulars that I actually developed friendships with, some even getting me Christmas gifts and such, so I did tell him things about myself in casual conversation during his visits. Just normal things that normal people talk about, though. One of the things I eventually told him was about the medical miracle that is my son. I even bragged about the fantastic job his doctors did, showing him the before and after photos of his surgeries. Over the past several weeks, Ryan's attitude towards me had changed. He was no longer this annoying, flirty, middle-aged guy, but rather a seemingly caring person. Maybe I was naive, but I genuinely appreciated his kindness, and I did not interpret it as a romantic gesture at all. Ryan continued coming by on my shifts for breakfast 3 times a week. February 2015 is when the first strange event occurred, which was soon followed by a string of more. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I had picked Chris up from the babysitter and was heading home from work. Now, where I lived was on a small uphill dead-end road. As you pulled onto my road from the main highway, you could easily see my trailer on the right side at the top of the hill. It was positioned perpendicular to the road, and the back side of it is visible as you drive up the road. As I eased my way up the hill, something immediately caught my eye. I could clearly tell my back door was open. I put the brakes on immediately and tried to figure out what to do. I never touched or unlocked that door, much less opened it, so I knew something was horribly wrong. A door is not going to unlock and open all by itself. I ended up parking my car off to the side of the road and calling Aaron. At this point, we were on good terms and co-parenting our son very well. Aaron came straight over and checked out my trailer while I remained back in my vehicle with Chris. About 5 minutes after entering, he called me and told me it was all clear. Again, a small trailer. So I made my way up the hill, expecting to have been robbed or something, but nothing was missing. There was no damage to the door, so Aaron basically brushed things off, saying that I must have forgotten to close it, or something like that. But I knew better, and since there was no sign of a B&E, I decided to let it go. 2 days later, on Thursday, I came home from work and the same thing. My back door is wide open. At this point, I know I'm not crazy. I know I have locked that damn door. It didn't have a deadbolt, by the way. It just had a lock on the doorknob that you turn. I had even tested it out that morning before work to make sure it was locked, so I called Aaron again. I stayed parked with Chris on the side of the road while he did a quick pass through my trailer. And again, nothing out of the ordinary except my open back door. A quick inventory showed me that nothing was missing. I was nervous at this point, thinking that somebody had broken in twice, and Aaron disagreed. He attributed the problem to a faulty doorknob lock, which made no sense to me. He then went to Lowe's and purchased a type of heavy-duty swivel lock to install on the door that locked from the inside of my home. He wanted to put my mind at ease, at least. So, while he installed the lock, I combed through the house. I literally spent hours after Aaron left inspecting every nook and cranny of my trailer. The outlets, my shower head, vents, my panty drawer, etc. I thought that maybe some freak had broken in and planted secret cameras since they didn't take anything. I didn't find anything amiss, so I begrudgingly let it go. So 2 days after that, so on Saturday afternoon, I'm off work heading uphill on the road towards my driveway. My son is spending the weekend with his dad, so I have the house to myself that evening. A wave of relief washes over me as I see that my back door is still closed. Now, I don't know why I decided to do this, but something compelled me to actually inspect the door up close. I needed to also make sure it wasn't tampered with. To my horror, I discovered that it had. There were pry marks along the edge of the door jamb. I immediately went inside and unlocked the door so I could open it and inspect further. The edge of the door was bent to hell and back on the inside, where the doorknob met the jamb. That damage wasn't there 2 days ago when Aaron installed the new lock. I deduced that somebody had probably been using the credit card trick or something similar to easily break into that door, since the way it locked was by the knob. And when they figured out that would no longer work, they tried to pry it open, not knowing that a new lock was on the other side of the door. I'm thankful that lock held. At this point, I called the police and made a report. They basically told me there wasn't much they could do in this instance other than document the incident. They told me to call them if anything else happened. Needless to say, that wasn't satisfactory to me, but I didn't know what else to do. I didn't feel comfortable sleeping at home that night, so I ended up making the hour drive to my parents' house and crashing there. Nothing else happened for a little while. By March, I had been able to put February's events behind me and feel secure in my home again. I was working and going about life as usual. At this point, Ryan had begun visiting the diner 5 days a week. Oddly enough, he was there each shift that I worked. It became a running joke with the other waitresses, and in fun they teased me about having a stalker. I would soon find out just how true that actually was, because in April things got weird. I came home from work one day to find my grass had been mowed. Now, I usually paid a neighbor to do it for me since I don't have a lawnmower. My yard is small, but maintaining it was a requirement of my lease agreement. My neighbor didn't charge much to mow it, and he needed the extra cash, so it was a win-win. I knew I hadn't asked my neighbor to mow recently, so I thought it was strange. I asked him if he went ahead and decided to do it anyway, and he said he hadn't. So then I called my landlord and asked her if she had mowed my grass for some reason. The lease said if it reaches a certain height, then she would mow it and charge me for it. I knew my grass hadn't been high enough to warrant that, but It was the only plausible explanation. Of course she said no. She hadn't mowed my grass. I was stumped. I then assumed that an anonymous neighbor must have mowed my grass out of the goodness of their heart. You know, like a pay it forward kind of thing. I mean, what else was I to think? All throughout April and the beginning of May, my grass was being anonymously mowed once per week. I know it sounds strange hearing that, but at the time I genuinely thought a neighbor was just doing neighborly things and didn't want to be recognized for it. On May 5th, 2015, Aaron and I decided to take Chris to the zoo. When we got back from the zoo late that afternoon, we discovered that my front door was cracked open. Now my front door did have a deadbolt, but I must have forgotten to lock it. How stupid of me. You can imagine how upset I was due to my back door being tampered with multiple times back in February. I just didn't understand why this was happening again. Like all the other times, nothing was taken. My belongings seemed untouched. Yes, I was feeling targeted, but I didn't call the police because I felt like I technically had nothing to report. There was nothing stolen or vandalized, just an open front door, so I let it go again. 2 days later, I would discover the depth of things. May 7th, 2015. It was one of my rare off days. I was at home relaxing when the diner called me. I answered thinking maybe my boss wanted me to come into work. It wasn't my boss, but my coworker Celia. She stated that somebody named Mary called the diner asking to speak to me. Mary had asked for me by name. Since I wasn't at work that day, Mary left her phone number and requested that I call her as soon as possible. I thanked Celia for relaying the message and ended the call perplexed. I didn't know who Mary was, but out of curiosity I gave her a call. Mary ended up being Ryan's estranged wife. I didn't even know he was married. She informed me that Ryan had a nervous breakdown while they were arguing earlier. He started raving like a wild man about how my name is a better girlfriend than she is and a wife. He told her that we were in love and that he had been taking care of me and my Down syndrome son for months. My son doesn't even have Down syndrome, by the way, and he's not mentally impaired in any way. She initially thought that it was all just crazy, fake talk, considering his mental state. He mentioned where I worked, and he said we were going to get married. Also said that I'd asked him to adopt my son. He said that he was going to run away with me in order to get away from her. He even told her he started visiting me after following me home one day. When he said that, Mary knew that something was wrong. Ryan had somewhat of a history with mental issues, and Mary was used to him weaponizing things to hurt her feelings during arguments, even if those things were lies, but she said this time was different. She knew he had started frequenting the diner, and red flags went way up for her when he admitted to following somebody home. So she decided to call the diner to see if anyone by my name worked there. When Celia confirmed this, Mary perceived the possible danger, and she left me her name and number, requesting a call back. My head was absolutely spinning at this point. While things were finally starting to make sense, I was still gobsmacked. At one point in the conversation, Mary mentioned my grass being mowed. Yes, Ryan even flaunted the yard work he did for me in her face. It was all very strange and very surreal. Basically, Ryan had been obsessing over me for months. He became delusional and had created a whole relationship between me and him in his mind. It was all in his head, and obviously he was the one that was breaking into my home when I was gone. The visits. Why he did it. I still haven't pieced that 100% together. He never took anything, and I imagine he was mowing my grass because that was his little way of taking care of me. Anyway, by the end of the call, I decided to go to the police department in person to file a report about Ryan. I thought at the very least that this was harassment and I needed it documented. Maybe I could get a restraining order. Mary offered to provide an official statement to the police as well, and I thanked her. The police department took our statements and the harassment complaint was filed, although I couldn't get a PO based off my statement alone. I had no hard proof. The officer did assure me that he would personally go talk to Ryan. I then went straight to the diner to inform my boss, Chase, of the situation. Now, Chase took this very seriously. Just that morning, a third shift waitress actually brought up to Chase how a man came into the diner very early, around 4 a.m. This man was trying to get her to tell him which days I'd be working that week. She told Chase it made her uncomfortable. So when I told Chase about Ryan, he went back and looked at the cameras from that morning. Sure enough, the man that was bothering third shift for info about me was Ryan. So Chase initiated the process through corporate to get a permanent ban on Ryan from the diner. It was approved at a later date. I was scheduled to work the following day and I was nervous throughout my entire shift. But thankfully Ryan didn't show up. Nor did he show up the following day or the next day after that. All was quiet at my home as well. The officer showing up at Ryan's house to speak with him must have spooked him enough to stop. Weeks, then months went by. No Ryan in sight. No vandalism at my home. No mysteriously mown grass. Nothing. My life had gone completely back to normal. But things changed again in October. October 5th, 2015, it was around 8 p.m. My son Chris fell asleep on the couch while watching a movie. I had dozed off as well until I heard a few very light knocks at my front door. I then walked to the kitchen and looked out the only window that faces my driveway. No cars were there except my own, so I figured that light tapping I heard at my door was either just the TV or my half-asleep brain playing tricks on me. I then returned to the couch and started playing a game on my phone. About 5 minutes later, I heard a few light knocks on my door again. This time I was wide awake, so I knew my brain wasn't playing tricks, so I walked back over to my kitchen window to double check the driveway to see who was there. Again, my car was the only one on the driveway. Right as I go to close the kitchen window blinds, loud knocking suddenly erupts at my front door. And I mean loud, like angry banging. I guess my instincts kicked in and I sprinted to the couch. I scooped Chris up into my arms and ran down the hallway to his bedroom. I did the only thing I could think of in that fraction of a moment. He was groggy and confused, but he listened to my instructions. Get under your bed, stay under it, and don't come out until I tell you to. I then ran to my kitchen and grabbed a knife while dialing 911. I actually screamed at the door that I was calling the police in hopes that it would scare them away. I positioned myself at the end of the hallway which connects my son's room to the living room. This way I'd have a clear view of both the front door in front of me and my son's bedroom doorway behind me. As the operator picked up my call, the banging on my front door was getting even louder. 911 said she was dispatching police right away. She instructed me to stay on the line until they arrived. About 12 minutes into the call, the banging got more violent, rattling pictures off the wall. I thought for sure that they would break my door down at any moment. 911 asked me where I was located in the home, and I told her. She asked me if I could hide somewhere, and she told me not to put myself in danger. In that tiny moment, I felt enraged. Hello. No, I'm not going to hide. I'm not taking my eyes off my son's bedroom under any circumstance. Where are the cops? And besides, I live in a small trailer, and the only hiding place for an adult is my bedroom closet. I'd be easily found. So I just erupted over the phone. Look, lady, I'm a single mom. I have no man, no gun, and no place to hide. If he breaks the door down, what am I supposed to do? Throw this knife at him? Where are the cops? She assured me again that the cops were on their way and to stay on the line. More banging, but this time it moved to the actual side of the trailer. It sounded like they were taking a baseball bat and beating it against the outside of the trailer. At that moment, Chris started shrieking. I ran the few steps over into his room to check on him. The loud commotion had just pushed his fear gauge over the edge. He was screaming and crying incessantly under his bed. I quickly ascertained that he was physically okay, and I returned back to the end of the hallway to check on the front door. As I was explaining to the police that my son was okay, just scared, I noticed that the banging had suddenly stopped. I waited for another minute or so, trying to listen out for any sign of further escalation, like window breaking or anything. All I could hear were cries coming from my son's room. All in all, it took the cops 23 minutes to arrive. By then, the perpetrator was long gone. For reference, I live about 10 minutes away from the police station. 911 even called it in as an active home invasion. I was livid about the response time. My front door was made out of some type of metal, just a cheap generic trailer door. It's now covered in dents. There were noticeable scratch marks on the lock. Failed attempt at picking the deadbolt. The siding on the trailer was damaged where the perpetrator had hit it with something. Given the history, I immediately suspected it was Ryan. The police said since I didn't actually see the person, they couldn't arrest him without a witness. The most they could do was make a report. They did end up canvassing the immediate area in case he was on foot, since I didn't see a vehicle in my driveway prior to this happening. However, there was no sign of him or anyone around and about. I deduced that he probably had parked nearby out of sight, that his vehicle wouldn't be spotted or recognized at my home. My home is situated next to a thin patch of woods that have public access roads on the other side. I also am absolutely convinced that Ryan had nefarious plans for me that evening, but when he discovered my son was at home with me, via his terrified shrieking, he bailed. He stopped trying to break into my home the moment my son inadvertently made his presence known. For whatever reason, Ryan always lit up when I talked about my son. He used to initiate conversations about Chris just to watch me dote over him. Looking back, I guess it was his morbid way of bonding with my child, and I think in his own warped way, he grew to care about him. So when he heard Chris scream, he decided not to follow through with whatever his plan was for me. I ended up taking a few days off of work because I was so shaken up. I stayed at my parents' house during that time because I was afraid to go home. My landlord had the damaged door replaced while I was gone. Realizing that I had a job and a life and that I couldn't stay gone forever, I knew that I had to go home. So I got a gun, a small caliber revolver, but it would do the job. And then I went home. I lived in that trailer for another 4 months before I saved up enough money to move. It was totally peaceful during those months, with no further events or altercations. but I just couldn't stand being there anymore. Since then, I have changed jobs, met somebody special, gotten engaged, bought a house, and got a dog. No further sign of Ryan anywhere during any of these life changes. It's been nearly 7 years since any sign of him. Ryan seems to have disappeared out of my life in the same manner he first appeared, out of nowhere, and I couldn't be happier that he's gone. Hopefully it stays that way. I used to do DoorDash on the side, just for some extra cash. Nothing crazy. Until a few months ago when something happened that I still can't stop thinking about. And to be honest, I haven't done a single delivery since. It was around 11 p.m. and I was finishing up my last order for the night. The delivery was in a quiet upscale LA neighborhood. Nothing out of the ordinary. I pull up, leave the car running like I always do, grab the food and drop it off. Super normal and no weird vibes from the customer or anything. But as I walk back to my car, something feels off. I can't explain it, but the air felt heavier, like I could sense something was wrong before I even got to the door. I get in the driver's seat, close the door, and glance in the rearview mirror. That's when I see him. There's a guy sitting in my back seat, just sitting there, hoodie pulled low over his face, completely still. My heart stopped. I was frozen, staring at him through the mirror, trying to figure out how the heck he got in my car. I managed to stammer out, "Can I help you?" And that's when he leans forward just a little bit and I can finally see his eyes. They were wide and bloodshot, like he hadn't slept for days. He leans back again and, in the calmest voice, says, "Drive." I don't get why, but I did. I started driving with my mind racing, trying to figure out what to do. He didn't say anything else, just sat there completely calm, while I drove through these dark streets, and I'm just freaking out inside, thinking this is it and this is how I'm going to get robbed or worse. Then he tells me to turn down a side street. It's dark, barely any street lights, and I'm just thinking, this is where it's going to go down. But right as we approach a gas station that's well lit and a few people around, I slam on the brakes, throw the car in park, and jump out screaming for help. The gas station clerk runs out and I'm yelling that there's a guy in my back seat. But when we go back to the car, it's empty. The guy was gone. No sign of him anywhere. He just vanished. I have no idea how he got out so fast or where he went, but I didn't care. I got back in my car, locked the doors, and drove straight home. I've replayed that night over and over in my head, and it still doesn't make sense. That was months ago, and I haven't touched the DoorDash app since. I don't know if I ever will. It's not worth risking something like that happening again. This happened about a month ago, and this still comes up in conversation because we genuinely just don't know what happened or was about to happen to us. Posting this story here to hear your thoughts and ideas. It was around 7 p.m. in November, so it was past dark in Metro Detroit. I was driving and my fiance was riding passenger. We were exiting a pretty populated highway when we turned onto a mile road near the city's shopping mall and outlet centers. Being in close proximity to the mall, it was strange the boulevard was that empty at that time of night. So we were driving on the deserted westbound side of the boulevard when we noticed that there was a stopped running vehicle in the middle lane. Again, it was dark aside from the street lights that line the road every 80 yards or so, but their brake lights were obviously lit and we were approaching quickly. My fiance and I were talking in the car at the time when we both kind of stopped to verbally question what we were both seeing. It was definitely strange behavior, especially since the speed limit is 45 to 50 miles per hour on this mile-long road. You don't want to be stopped, especially this close to people exiting the highway, so we slowed down since we were cautious drivers. We approached and passed the vehicle in the far left lane as it was in the middle, and when we were about a car length in front of it, the driver gunned it and started speeding up to catch us. We never left our left-hand lane, but at this point I was braking, because again, the behavior was off and we noticed their driving was sporadic. Braking was almost instinctual as much as it probably wasn't safe to do so. Continuing to drive down this mile-long road, still no traffic. We can see in either direction. We noticed the driver was swerving their car between the middle lane and the left lane, as if trying to intentionally sideswipe us. Instant red flag, obviously. It wasn't like the driver was intoxicated or texting and just doing a poor job to stay in their lane. This was a driver in control of their swerving and coming dangerously close to hitting the side of my Jeep, going about 45 miles per hour. Bad vibes. Before we knew it, we were blinded by a spotlight coming from the driver's window into my car, via the passenger window. I have 20 tints on my Jeep windows, which usually help control the brightness of the sun most mornings and evenings, and even with the tints, this spotlight stunned us and we couldn't see anything but white. I didn't have time to check my mirrors before slamming on my brakes. Not sure I would have even been able to see my mirrors after being blinded. I remember my fiance screaming, "What the F?" We opened our eyes and the driver was yards ahead of us, speeding to get away. I had my fiance dial 911 immediately. I don't take BS, so I started racing down the road to catch up to him for a license plate number. In Michigan, we have Michigan left turn lanes, and I could see the vehicle up ahead turning into one to enter the mall parking lot, which is a huge roundabout. The roundabout's speed limit is approximately 25 miles per hour with frequent stop signs and intersections. My fiance connected with dispatch on the phone as I was trying to desperately catch up to the vehicle. They were blowing every red light and stop sign in sight. Dispatch recommended we don't follow, but I kind of did anyways because I was really upset and committed to grabbing their plate number, but from a safe distance and at a safe speed. No way was I going to tail this person when we didn't know if they had a weapon or something. Long story short, this driver knew we were following them and they were speeding through the roundabout, cutting drivers off and blowing intersections when we lost sight of them. At this point, the police said the cops in the area were already on their way, looking for the vehicle we described and that we should leave it to them. We weren't going to jeopardize our safety and the safety of other drivers. So we stopped our chase, but still crossed an intersection into another shopping center across the street. We saw the driver enter. We figured we could prowl instead of chase in case we saw them again. We never found that car again. Never found out who that driver was, what his motive was, or if the cops found him. We knew it was a male driver because we saw him through his driver's side window before he blinded us. White male, dark baseball hat, and he drove a dark sedan that looked like a newer Ford Fusion. It was a close run-in, and I'm not sure what would have happened if he had successfully crashed into us on that deserted mile road, or if his spotlight had successfully veered my car off the road. We don't think this was a case of road rage since we didn't really do anything to provoke him. To the dude who scared the crap out of us and took away our eyesight while driving a motor vehicle. Middle finger emoji. Edit. A Michigan left refers to a type of turn where left turns at an intersection are not allowed. Instead, to turn left, you must drive straight or turn right onto the perpendicular road, then make a U-turn at a median crossover. And a mile road is part of Michigan's naming convention for differentiating common parallel roads in the metro area and facilitating easy navigation of the region. Dating back to 1815. 37 of these roads, spaced 1 mile apart, exist between downtown Detroit and the northern boundary of Macomb County. The most well-known mile road would be the infamous 8 Mile. When I was 16 or 17, I was coming home to Brooklyn from a movie in Manhattan with my friends. I was the only one who lived in Brooklyn, so I walked home from the train alone. I was used to being out late by myself. I had a midnight curfew, but I frequently broke it because I thought nothing bad would ever happen to me, despite an uptick of crime in our neighborhood at the time. This night, however, I was actually trying to get home on time for once. It was the summer after I graduated high school and I was feeling amazing. I had a little to drink and a little to smoke and I was feeling on top of the world. It was so hot out. I remember what I was wearing. It was like this long sheer cape thing with a very tight and revealing little dress underneath. Not that anything would have probably been different if I'd been wearing shorts and a t-shirt. However, because of my fun outfit, I was feeling myself and being stupid, taking selfies while I walked down the streets and listening to music with both headphones in, not paying any attention to my surroundings. I think I even sang as I walked. I got to my building after finishing my 10-minute walk from the train and walked up the steps to our apartment. We live in a brownstone, with apartments in it, and ours was on the 3rd floor. We had a gate at the bottom of the steps separating us from the sidewalk. I pulled out my headphones and began to fumble with my keys at the top of the steps. Just as I had found the correct key, still humming to myself and thinking about my great night, I heard the latch on the gate clank as if it were being opened. I turned around and I saw a man standing at the gate staring up at me. He was young, probably early 20s, wearing a gray hoodie with the hood up, covering part of his face, but I could see his eyes, and immediately I knew something was off because of how blank yet nervous his expression was. One hand was on the handle of the gate as if he were about to open it completely, but he stopped once I turned around. Somehow my fight or flight instinct didn't kick in yet. It was probably the alcohol. I cautiously called down, "Can I help you?" And he didn't respond. I looked him over more closely and realized that his other hand, the one not on the gate, was moving fast and low near his waist. I registered that he was touching himself. Gasped, and within milliseconds he was sprinting up the stairs behind me, reaching out to grab me. My brain clicked into place and I started screaming at the top of my lungs as I jammed my key into the door and slammed it behind me. I ran up the stairs screaming for my dad, not even stopping to make sure the door was locked, thinking that if he followed me upstairs he'd soon be met by my very tall father and our very loud dogs who slept in the bedroom right next to our apartment door. As I looked over my shoulder while tearing my way upstairs, I saw his face pressed up against the glass window, still watching, but now his eyes were furious. I ran into our apartment still screaming to my parents to call the police. My dad went downstairs and looked around, but he was gone. The police came anyways after my mom called and came upstairs to take my statement so they could make the report. The two cops who showed up asked me to describe him. I did, and they said they would cruise around looking for him, and regardless of if he was found, a detective would call me soon to make a more detailed report. They never called me. There were many more rapes and assaults that continued to take place in my neighborhood for the rest of the summer. I shudder every time I think about what would have happened if I hadn't taken out my headphones before I began unlocking my door. I don't know how long he was following me for, and as far as I know, he was never caught. From that point on, for the last few weeks before I left for college, I would call my dad and make him meet me at the train station so he could walk me home safely. Now, as an adult, I'm far more cautious than I was as a teenager, of course. I'm always extra aware of my surroundings, especially at night, and I don't look at my phone while I walk home. I'll never get the image of his blank stare as he lunged towards me out of my head, and I'll never forget the feeling in the pit of my stomach as I realized that he followed me home, watching me and doing what he was doing to himself, and was now waiting to strike. It was like being a deer realizing it's being stalked by a tiger because the tiger accidentally stepped on a twig and gave itself away right before it could pounce on its prey. I-22 female was on vacation in San Antonio with a friend for New Year's. In retrospect, I would have picked anywhere else to celebrate, but I had never been to San Antonio before, so I thought it would be cool. When we pull up to the place, it's very obvious it's not in a great neighborhood, but it was extremely cheap and within walking distance to the Riverwalk. I'm no stranger to questionable neighborhoods, so I wasn't too concerned about the area as it was very quiet. On the day of New Year's Eve, my friend got food poisoning and asked me to get them some stuff from the gas station down the road. I wasn't comfortable taking their truck, and since it was only an 8-minute walk, I started heading out. Got to the gas station, no problem, but they didn't have any Pedialyte, so I started walking to another gas station only 5 minutes away or so. This is where it gets sketchy. I'm halfway to the gas station and I noticed there are two homeless guys walking around outside their tents next to the street I'm on. Originally, I was going to walk right past them and pay them no mind, but when I got closer, I could tell that they noticed me and were staring at me hard. I'm 5'5", not super athletic, pretty strong, but I'm not taking my chances with two grown men. Instead of going straight past them, I turned the corner. I assumed they would go about their business and leave me alone. I hear one of them say, "Hey Randy, come over here," and I glance behind me and see three men now following me. They're far enough away that I'm not worried, but extremely cautious. I glance behind me again after a few minutes and they're hunched over, huddled up like they're trying to sneak up on me, much closer this time. I make the smart decision to say, screw the Pedialyte, and round the corner back towards our place. I'm maybe 1 to 2 blocks away when I check behind me again, and they have also rounded the corner and are walking quickly. I start booking it, and I hear the men behind me yelling at me. I didn't look back this time, but I could hear shuffling feet breaking into a run. Thankfully, I made it inside before they could see where I went. I peeked out the peephole in the door and watched in horror as these three men came barreling around the corner and frantically looked around for me. They are arguing and pointing around, but eventually they screw off. If I weren't so alert, I shudder to think what would have happened, and no, I didn't get the Pedialyte. I had to get it delivered. This happened around the very early 70s. My family, including my uncle by marriage, were all born and raised in a tiny area in the deep south. This story is still told at family reunions, etc., and I have full permission from my aunt and uncle to tell this, but I will not reveal any information such as where they are from and stuff like that. My uncle went away and fought in Vietnam, returned home, and with my aunt, my dad's older sister, was married. While my uncle was in Nam, he said when something bad was going to happen, like something awful to one of his friends over there, or when there was a bad battle with his company, he could almost feel it. He said there would be this terrible sense of dread. Sometimes he would have that dread, like a burden for a week or so before anything happened. Sometimes it would be an hour or so, or anywhere in between. So here goes the story. It was January or February, and the weather had been unseasonably warm that year. My aunt and uncle had only been married for a few months, and he was going out of town the following day after this incident happened. Job-related. He'd be gone for 2 weeks. He and my aunt were not looking forward to being apart, so it was a Sunday, and they decided to make the day special. He went to church with her, which was something he rarely did, and they decided to splurge and eat at one of the great seafood restaurants, and afterwards, they were going to walk on the beach. My aunt said they were having a great time, seeing old friends at the church, and the restaurant was really good. It was just one of those days where everything seemed right. On the way to the beach they were headed to, my uncle said he began having that same sense of dread that he had when he was in Vietnam. He didn't want to spoil my aunt's fun, so he thought it was like what they call PTSD. Back then it was called a flashback. He was trying to not take it seriously, but he said the sense of foreboding was bad. They got to the beach. To explain something about this particular beach, you had to park beside the road and walk across the wide expanse of sand to get to the water, and this beach was very secluded, especially in winter. My aunt was walking in her stocking feet, collecting shells and having a great time. She loved the beach and still does. They saw another young couple walking also. My aunt and uncle didn't know them. They seemed like late teens in age. Anyways, my uncle said he couldn't fight that bad feeling any longer. He finally grabbed my aunt by the arm and said, "Let's get out of here." She got mad and wasn't ready to go yet, and he was dragging her across the sand towards their car, and they were arguing the whole way. He didn't tell her what was wrong because he even felt like he was probably having a flashback, but he said he felt 100% better when they were in the car and headed home, and my aunt got over being mad. My aunt and uncle said a big car, which had 4 hippie-type guys in it, passed them on the road heading to the beach. Anyway, the story in the newspaper was the following day. My uncle realized why he was having such a bad feeling. These 4 guys kidnapped this guy and girlfriend. The guys were actually local men, and my aunt and uncle had gone to school with a couple of them. The 4 guys were on some kind of drugs. Remember the time in history this was, and they put the guy in the trunk and they took this woman out and assaulted her for hours. They had a gun and kidnapped them from the beach at gunpoint. This shocked the area because it was a very low crime area. If my aunt and uncle had stayed at the beach, there is no telling what could have happened to her, and they would have probably shot him, because he would have fought to try and give her a chance to get away. The law had been looking for these 4 guys all day because the guys had gotten into some other mischief the day before, so the law had a description of them in their vehicle. Hi, I am a female entering my senior year in high school. I've been lurking on this sub for a few days and found myself wondering how the heck so many people have had scary run-ins with such horrible people, but then I realized that I know so many creeps and terrible people myself when I think about it. One in particular has been on my mind lately. I will refer to him under the alias as Kyle. I grew up with him. We're the same age and have gone to school with each other our entire lives. I have recently found out he has committed a disgusting crime. I'll elaborate on that later, that I did not consider him capable of. I figured to be that messed up, you have to show signs, but I never saw it coming. I thought I would walk you through my childhood with him. Forgive the length of this. I tend to stretch my stories out and I'm sick of keeping this inside. My first notable encounter with Kyle takes place in the 1st grade. He and I were friends. As much weight as that carries when you're 6. Our teacher that year was a hot mess, really. She was all over the place and it allowed far too much to slip under the radar. One day, Kyle had successfully managed to hide in the classroom while the rest of us went to lunch. His absence was not noticed until after. I was the first to return to the class, only to find Kyle holding my beloved Littlest Pet Shop backpack, which appeared to be cut up. I approach him, who was holding my now unusable bag in one of his hands with a pair of scissors in the other. I address the elephant in the room and ask him, did you just cut my backpack? To which he responds, no, scissors still in hand. He ended up in trouble and was forced to apologize. I never really cared afterwards and we remained on good terms. I always looked back upon this story and laughed, nothing more. A couple of years later, we are still friends and sit next to each other. I and Kyle seem to get along quite well, bonding over our maladjustment and detachment from the learning environment. For me, this could be attributed to severe anxiety and ADHD, but for him, it was something more concerning later to emerge. He was a bad influence for sure, but I was lonely and felt estranged from the girls my age, which led me to socialize with a lot of boys. I felt comfortable because of the crude nature and normalization of violence amongst a lot of these young boys, which is really questionable when I type it out loud. It makes you rethink the societal roles gender plays. He drew gory stick figure fights and crude cartoons, but it seemed so normal in the context of other boys at that age. I and Kyle could talk about zombies and action movies and make internet jokes. I thought he was cool and edgy. I had always struggled with math and found it hard to focus, but he made it worse this particular year. He would sit there and tear pieces of paper from his math workbook and then eat them. I once asked the question with the obvious answer, "Are you eating paper right now?" He told me to try it too, so I did. We sat there like lunatics and competed to see who could chew and swallow the largest chunk of paper. How we got away with this is just beyond me. I also told this story in good humor due to how obscure it is. Stupid antics continued and recess roughhousing ensued. Now we are preteens about to enter middle school. I began to reconnect with my female friends and spent more and more time with them in conjunction with my male friends. Kyle had come out as bisexual and later pansexual, and this is where we began to drift. I was raised in a very conservative household and I didn't support LGBTQ rights. I never mistreated my friends who identified this way, probably because I was closeted, but still did not agree with the idea. Kyle and I remained friends but didn't talk much. He was still constantly getting in trouble in school and acting immaturely as other boys began to grow out of their hyperactivity and aggression. In middle school, it surfaced that many guys were made to feel uncomfortable by Kyle's attraction to them when they did not reciprocate. I think we all ignorantly dismissed that as homophobia without the context available now. We hardly talked, let alone about our feelings, but I noticed him growing increasingly depressed and estranged from everybody else. He had become a very disagreeable person and didn't get along with a lot of people in our grade. He was still considered cool and funny to an extent, but I was growing up and beginning to enjoy being a teen with my own life. Other than snarky chuckles and remarks here and there, his demeanor was dull and slightly cold. In high school, I didn't see him at all. I was close with people close to him and heard about him, but we didn't communicate nor have classes together. During our freshman year, maybe even our early sophomore year, I'm not exactly sure, Kyle got into big trouble with administration. He had brought a realistic-looking assault-style BB gun to school in his backpack. In the morning before school started, he invited a few people to his locker to see the fully loaded weapon. I have no clue what on earth he expected to happen or why he wanted to bring it to school, but people quickly caught wind of the contents of his bag and it was confiscated and he was suspended. Tidbits of information like that popped up in conversations, usually followed by a "what the heck is wrong with him?" But he was nothing more than some jerk that I used to do stupid stuff with and get in trouble with. I really didn't think of this kid at all until a few months ago at work, when it happened to discover that my new coworker was also Kyle's sister-in-law. I always knew that he had a large family with tons of older siblings, but I hardly interacted with any of them because they were so much older than us. I only worked with this woman for maybe a month, but I can tell you that she's an absolute sweetheart. We talked about the exciting news for a recent positive pregnancy test and the little boy she had to come. Then we reached the topic of Kyle. At the time, I was oblivious to his recent crime, as it was not publicly released information. I told her stories, including the first two I told you guys, all while laughing. She laughed too, then trailed off and said, "Yeah, he doesn't like me much at all." I think it became the worst when he was figuring out his sexuality. And I was like, "Oh yeah, I remember that phase." We both kind of laughed and moved on. She asked me if we still talked and I told her no, but I still hear funny stories about him around school. Her smile faded and she looked as if she wanted to say something else about him, but she changed the subject. It is apparent she is uncomfortable with Kyle and I feel bad for talking to him almost fondly, even if I have no clue what has just happened. I didn't even know that he had been placed in a mental institution, let alone notice he was gone. Once she realized I hadn't heard, I don't think she wanted to be the one to break the news to me. I never brought him up to her again. We arrive at the present, well, almost. Last month, I and a friend were talking about this other creep in our friend group who keeps trying to assault people in their sleep at parties. This dude is seriously deranged, like, I fear who he will grow up to be is kind of deranged. And my friend made a joke comparing this dude to Kyle, and I laughed. She elaborated more and expressed her disgust with him, talking about Kyle, and I realized I was missing the full context, so I asked her why she felt that strongly. She told me that he had recently assaulted his younger stepsister and was taken into custody for it. This was a powerless little kid we were talking about, within their own home presumably more than once. Apparently, he's become more of a danger with violent tendencies, a full-blown creep that harasses and assaults those he can take advantage of. There are other people he has harmed, and there will be more, I'm sure. He craves power. People like this don't just grow out of it, it worsens. I mentioned my age in my intro deliberately because something about how young he is creeps me out even more. Knowing that he is free and still mentally unwell, able to carry on and do something worse. I was actually shocked when I heard this because I didn't think he was capable of doing something like this. Especially being a child and his little sister. In retrospect, I can see he was different, but I didn't see any of it as concerning at the time. He finished the school year in person. He walks the same halls I do. The worst part is only a small handful of people know about the little sister thing. I only know because my friend is dating one of Kyle's former best friends, and she couldn't stand carrying the burden of this knowledge, so she swore me to secrecy. Of course, Kyle acts as if it never happened, and it didn't carry any weight to him. He told a couple of his now ex-close friends what he did, like it means nothing to him. I see my peers talk to him like normal, and they are completely oblivious to truly know how weird he is. If you read or listened to this whole thing, thanks. I'm sick of holding this information inside. I need to let it out somewhere, if not with my friends at school. My name is Angelina. This happened in 2012 when I was only 15. I am my mom's only daughter. When I was born, my mom had just married my father, and to preserve his real name, I'll call him John. When John discovered my mom's pregnancy, who we will call Grace, he freaked out. He started treating my mom badly. He probably cheated on her too. But Grace didn't want me to not have a dad, so she tried to hold on to the relationship. Until I was born and John filed for divorce, and then he left town. My mom raised me alone with a lot of effort. John had moved to another city and sometimes sent me gifts for my birthdays. I thought it was really cute, and I really wanted that one day I could meet him. I didn't know he was a bad person until all this happened. Days before my 15th birthday, John showed up, much to our surprise. Without asking my mom for permission, he arrived with a backpack full of his clothes, saying he wanted to spend my birthday week with me. Grace was surprised but still hated him because she didn't even ask for permission, and she didn't want to see his face. I didn't know why, and I invited him to sleep in my room. In fact, he's my dad. What's wrong? I didn't even think about his actions. The whole time he was looking at me, crazy. So far, so good. He slept on the floor with a lot of covers. The day before my birthday, my bed broke, and I was going to sleep with my mom, but John asked me to sleep with him together on the floor because he wanted to wake up with me congratulating him. I thought the idea was cool and agreed. At night, I put on my pajamas and lied down next to him, and just when I laid down, he pretended to be asleep, and then I fell asleep too. A few hours later, I woke up feeling liquid on my skin. When I opened my eyes, my dad was masturbating in front of me and on my stomach. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I realized I was out of my pajamas and blushed with embarrassment. Just when he realized that I was going to scream, John covered my mouth and tied my hands with a rope that spread on the floor. He withdrew his hand from my mouth and told me to be silent. He was going to get a knife from the kitchen. I had no choice, so I dragged myself to the window and screamed for my mom. John and Grace automatically heard. I went behind the closed door to prevent him from entering. My mom's room faces the kitchen, so when she opened the door, she came across my dad naked in the kitchen with my pajamas on his shoulder. She recognized them and took the knife out of his hand. John was unresponsive and ran out of the house, even naked and in my clothes at dawn. Grace called the police, and they found John on a street very close to our house, running desperately with my pajamas covering his face so he wouldn't be recognized. What we didn't know is he had mental problems and was once arrested for trying to assault a girl in the city where he lived. I spent hours in that room crying. To this day, I am traumatized and have nightmares about it, but couldn't live in that house any longer, much less celebrate my birthday. We moved to a place further away from there. I spent a lot of time going to the psychologist, but I'm not 100% recovered from it. We don't know where John is anymore, but I still prefer not to know any more about him. I joined Reddit recently and would like to share this with you, and I hope nothing like this ever happens to any of you. It's horrible, and even today I can't get over it. Sorry this is a bit long. I know this isn't a therapist's office, but this has bothered me for a long time and I wanted to get it off my chest. This happened in June 2018 in Portland, Oregon. I understand I acted like an idiot in this situation. Since then, I've become more observant, cautious, and honestly much more paranoid. I went dancing with my friends and was really drunk by midnight. Unfortunately, this was back when I had little money, and I realized you could save money by eating very little before going out, and it would take far fewer drinks to get drunk. So I was so drunk I barely remember my friend ordering me an Uber home. My phone was dead, of course. I can vaguely recall them helping me get into the car and telling me to get home safe. I don't remember greeting the driver or the first minute or so, but soon after getting in, he asked how my night was and if I smoked. Honestly, I was just thinking about bed at this point, so I sort of just slurred out that I did sometime. He then offered me a joint, and this is the first moment I get sort of nervous and begin paying attention. I tell him something like I'm really tired and just ready to get home. I think he said something about it being an indica-based joint and it was made perfect for sleep. Once again, I say something like not exactly, no, but not a yes, which he takes as a yes. I'll take that joint now. Once again, I'm still drunk enough I can barely see straight or speak clearly, so when he says, okay, well, I have to cancel the ride really quick because I can't give it to you while I'm on the clock, or something to that effect. It takes me a second to realize how dangerous that is, and by the time I start to say something, he has canceled the ride and pulls over. We were in an area just east of the Hawthorne Bridge, I think, and it was totally secluded. Some empty parking lots, a closed auto body shop, and nobody in sight. It's starting to hit me. I'm now in the car, not with an Uber driver, but with some stranger. I can't call anyone, and he's trying to give me weed that could have anything in it. For the next minute or so, we're pretty quiet, or I just can't remember any small talk he tried to make because I was beginning to panic. And every time he handed me the joint, I would take fake hits, just breathing it into my mouth and not into my lungs. I felt tired, clumsy, and weak. That kind of drunk where you're almost at the point of nausea, and I knew I couldn't do much of anything to defend myself at that point. I remember vividly being fixated for a moment on the fact I didn't even have a pair of keys to defend myself with, as my building used fobs for just about everything, and I didn't take my mail key with me. As I'm freaking out, I look up to see if this guy is sort of noticing, and I make eye contact with him in the mirror. He was staring, but I couldn't read his expression. Finally, he says something along the lines of, well, let's get out of here. I tell him I'll just call another Uber to get home, thinking at this point it might even be safer to walk, and he says, no, I still have your address, I'll just take you. For a moment I was relieved. I guess I wanted to believe him so badly that I would get home safe. I believed him. I tried to calm myself down, thinking he hadn't actually done anything threatening. Maybe he was just your typical stoner guy and I was overreacting. This time I lived on the PSU campus in downtown Portland, in the southwest area of the city. He is driving me north on the east side of the river. There are several bridges to our left, and as he keeps moving north, he has several opportunities to take an exit to hop over the river and get me back downtown. He keeps skipping them. I keep passing bridge after bridge that could get me home. Up in northeast Portland, there are some large industrial areas that can get very isolated at night, and Portland in general is surrounded by lots of forests, so I knew he could have me in this secluded area really quick. After he passes like the fourth exit for a bridge, pretty sure it was the Broadway Bridge, I've been racking my brain for a way to make him actually take me home and say something to the effect of, hey, my boyfriend is waiting for me at home, which was true, though I said it in a very meek way. My driver says nothing, but he did take the next exit for a bridge and basically hung a giant U-turn that started taking me home. Even as we are on the west side of town heading south, I'm still shaking and have my hand on the door handle, thinking about just hopping out at a red light the closer we get to my apartment. My phone is completely dead, and he honestly still has several chances to hop onto nearby highways and speed out of the city. We're getting pretty close to my apartment now, and I'm once again trying to convince myself I'm being paranoid about some stoner that can't navigate the city. Although a few minutes before I was so scared I was crying. So once we get about 2 blocks from my apartment, I lie and tell him it's easiest to stop here and he can let me out. Again, he doesn't say anything but does slow the car. I'm flooded with relief and even feel myself smile, but when I go to open the door, it's locked. I try to lift the lock mechanism manually, but it won't budge. I look up at him instinctually to see what was up, and he's got his head turned almost fully towards me, shoulders still facing the road, smiling at me. The worst smile I've ever seen in my life. It looked so mocking, and it just did not reach his eyes at all. I just started crying and asking him to open the door. I was so freaked out and still very drunk, and thankfully he did. I will never forget the sensation of vulnerability, not just being drunk in his car with no way to contact anyone. But even as I got out of the car, I kept feeling like he would somehow grab the back of my shirt and pull me back in, as weird as that might sound. When I got home, I find out that my boyfriend had actually gone out with friends last minute and wasn't even home. He wouldn't even have known till much later if I hadn't gotten back safe. The next day I convinced myself I was freaking out over nothing, which I realized still could be the case, but in my gut I had truly felt in danger the night before. Technically this guy could have been totally harmless, but I think I should have texted my friend and had her report him. The big thing that made me think of this was recently hearing about how Ed Kemper, co-ed killer, would go for practice runs picking up hitchhikers and seeing if he could get the passenger or potential victims to trust him, or how far out of his comfort zone he could push them without them saying anything. Obviously this guy wasn't Ed Kemper, but I hate wondering if that night was a practice run of sorts for my Uber driver. Thanks to whoever reads through this or listens to the whole thing. I'm at a point in my life where I'm realizing how much danger I put myself in when I was younger and just depressed as hell, and it made me both surprised and deeply grateful I'm still here. So I was a security guard for this local company in my area. I was assigned to a water park with another guard who was regularly there keeping watch. He was to train me and show me around and tell me what codes open what doors. I first noticed how quick he was to enter and leave the property. He never wanted to spend more than 10 minutes inside the property before he'd be eager to leave. Our first night was simple. There was nothing exciting or interesting going on, so our night dragged. After a few hours, I asked him if he'd experienced anything unusual while working there. He told me that he's had some problems with people trying to enter the property without permission, but that was about it. He also told me he hated working there because of his encounters with these people. He said they creeped him out because of how sneaky they were. He didn't really want to tell me much because he was afraid I would leave the post. That should have been a red flag for me, but I was too excited to let anything like that scare me. A few more hours later and our shift is over, so we clock out and go home for the day. The next night my boss calls me to explain that the security guard, my partner, had resigned. I was a little upset because now I was to work a two-man post all by myself with barely any knowledge of the place. Fast forward a few weeks, I started to get the hang of the place and created my own routine with no issues at all. No break-ins, vandalism, or anything. It's now 2 a.m. and I was outside at the front of the property completing my rounds when I heard a door slam from inside. I jumped because of how loud it was. As I started to walk back into the property, I could hear doors opening and closing. I could also feel myself getting nervous because it was my first situation I've ever had at this place like this. As I walk inside and start to check the doors and complete a round to make sure there is nobody on the property, I get to this corridor where there is a set of stairs that leads down to a door that is wide open. I walked down the stairs to close and lock the door because I was too scared to take a look inside. As I turned around to head back up the stairs, I noticed a man dressed in all black standing at the top. I take a step back and realize I'm cornered. If he were to try anything, I'd have nowhere to run or hide. So I politely asked him if he needs any help. He didn't reply. I then asked him how he got into the property, and he didn't say a word. He slowly turned his head and snapped his fingers, and then from the left side of the staircase, another man slowly crawled to the side like a dog on all fours. I then turned around and kicked the door open and ran inside and locked myself in a bathroom, as I called my boss and told him what I witnessed. They set an armed security guard to my position to complete a walkthrough to make sure I was safe. As I got the call that the area was clear, I came out and told them everything from the start to finish. I realized that they didn't believe me, so I clocked out and went home for the night. The next morning, I received a call from my boss, explaining that they checked the security footage from the night before, and what they told me horrified me. Every hour, when I would complete my rounds inside the property, those same two men would follow me through the facility as if they were stalking me, like as if it were a game to them. After that, I asked for a new position because I was too horrified to work at that water park. I now know why my trainer didn't want to work there anymore. This actually happened to me, and I have more creepy stories like this one from when I was working security, so please let me know if you want to listen to more. I got you. When I was 20, I was a young man living large in my first kind of crappy apartment in downtown Atlanta. I was in a committed relationship with my 19-year-old girlfriend, and she would sleep over basically every night, and since we were in the throes of young romance, obviously we slept naked. Everything was great. One night, still groggy from sleep, I looked up to see a man in the doorway. Frequently suffer from sleep paralysis and almost immediately thought nothing of it, but unlike with sleep paralysis, I was able to move and rub my eyes. That's when the gravity of the situation set in. Luckily, my girlfriend was fully covered, but I was not even in the slightest, and I instantly felt violated, angry, and protective of my girlfriend, so I grabbed a knife from my bedside table, still naked, and went to investigate, which in hindsight was not the best move. Right outside of my bedroom, there was a shampoo bottle from my bathroom and a mysterious substance on the wall and ground, which thankfully the police identified as just shampoo. I freaked out at all the sight of this, though, because this was when I realized that it was not a sleep paralysis demon, but a real person with whom I, butt naked, made eye contact with as I woke up. He left out the back and took my key with him. It was one of those locks that could only be unlocked from the inside, so he effectively stopped me from seeing him by locking me in and took my only key to my place in one fell swoop. Needless to say, my then girlfriend and I got the heck out of there to another person's apartment and waited for the cops to arrive. By the time they did, all of my electronics were gone. He hit a few of my neighbors' places too, but as far as I can tell, he was never caught. My best friend Amelia, 27 female, and I, 29 female, have reason to suspect that we were drugged on Monday night, October 28, 2019. Names changed. I'm going to go through this whole thing chronologically. This took place at a bar nearby door called Lobby that was hosting a horror night, playing 3 future horrors with sound each Monday of October. I live about 5 doors down from Lobby. I trusted the bartenders there. They look out for their female patrons and normally have many as a result. It's a funky, nerdy bar, and I know the staff well from living in the neighborhood. The previous Monday, October 21st, 2019, I went to Lobby with my roommate Maria for a horror screening event. She left after the first film, and I moved to the bar and met a guy named Jeff. We talked about horror for hours and seemed to have the beginning of a good connection. Towards the end of the night, I was fairly intoxicated, which was probably evident, as I had trouble remembering his name. I'm not great with names in general, but this was a bit much. He asked to buy me another drink and I declined because I didn't want to get messy. I asked if he was single and for his number. He responded that he was single and put his information in my phone. I followed up the next day and so did he. He suggested going to a movie together and I agreed, but told him I wouldn't be available until next week, but that I would be at next week's horror screening at Lobby. He told me he looked forward to seeing me there. I also invited Amelia. Jeff and I texted a little throughout the week, but not much. He seemed interested. At 7, I showed up to the lobby. I noted I was hungry and left to get food. I returned with a huge pad thai dish that I ate my fill of. I was entirely full. I had no interest or intention of getting intoxicated. I just wanted to watch the films and get to know Jeff a bit better. I also have a high alcohol tolerance because I drink a lot in general, and I've been drinking the previous weekend, all the weekend, further boosting my tolerance. Around 7:20 I had my first beer. It was a stout of 9%, but it was a half pint. Amelia arrived at 8:30 at this point. I had just ordered my second beer, a 7% IPA. When she arrived, she tried a sip of my beer, liked it, and ordered the same. I told her I had food and shared some with her. She had a few bites. I had also ordered a glass of water and had it nearby, but wasn't really drinking it yet. Around 9 or 9:30, Jeff arrived and said hello. He asked if I'd been there for long, and I told him I came for the first movie. He told me he'd been at the lobby for 20 minutes, but I hadn't seen him arrive or sit at the other end of the bar. Amelia was to the right of me, and a regular patron called Jenna was to my left. I was excited to get to know Jeff more and asked Jen if she would mind swapping seats for a bit. Amelia knew I was interested in this guy too and didn't mind, although she told me later that she didn't like him. She said he came up as having an undue arrogance. Amelia and Jen ended up getting along really well and conversing more intensely. Our drinks were never left completely unattended. Either she or I was there, but I realized that I did get up to pee a couple of times, while Amelia was distracted with Jen, and that's when our drink or drinks could have been drugged. We suspect my water was drugged as it was the only other item we shared, other than the pad thai. I don't remember thinking much of it until later in the night, maybe 10:30 or 10:45. When I drank it, we think she saw it and drank it too. In the end, I had one more beer, another IPA. In total, I had 2 pints of 7% beer and 1/2 pint from the hours of 7 p.m. to 11:30 p.m. on a full stomach. However, around the 10:30 mark, I started to show signs of mild intoxication. By 11 o'clock, more extreme. I don't remember my conversations vividly. There are texts I don't remember sending. Around 11:20 or 11:30, I asked Jeff if he was interested in me because it seemed that he had been the week before, but now I was unsure. I don't remember his exact response, but I know he declined. I think normally this would embarrass me, but I don't remember feeling that upset. I do know that I was unnerved by my level of intoxication and asked for my bill. It was also to the logical point in the night to settle up anyway. I remember looking down at my bill and it was $24. Then I blacked out. My memory flashed back about 15 minutes later. I was walking into my bedroom and Amelia was in my bed. I didn't know how she got there and was surprised to see her. She was passed out. I got into bed and passed out beside her. We were likely in bed by 12 a.m., so everything happened fast after 11. I don't remember how I paid, and I don't remember saying goodbye to Jeff or any other patrons. Don't remember leaving, unlocking my door, greeting my dog, or inviting my best friend up. I just remember looking at my bill and my memory going black. Amelia had 4 IPAs in total over a slightly shorter amount of time, enough to make her buzzed or even drunk, but with her tolerance not enough to mess her up like that. She remembers drinking 4 beers and feeling good, slightly buzzed. Remembers liking Jen and not liking Jeff. She remembers having some of my water. After 3 beers she got her bill, around 10:30 or 11, with no intention of having more. However, a little while later she ordered a 4th. That's the last thing she remembers, and she doesn't remember drinking the beer, paying for it, or how she ended up in my bed fully clothed. Thankfully, we were unharmed. My best friend and I presumably left and crashed together. We woke up the next day genuinely baffled about our night and unusually hungover. 2.5 beers has never been enough to make me feel drunk, let alone hungover. Amelia felt the same. While 4 beers was enough to make her feel like a good buzz, it wasn't enough to make her feel that drunk and that unwell the next day. We were both unable to recall any additional details during our blackouts. The hangover, which made us feel nauseated, tired, and confused, lasted the entire following day and night. She experienced a headache as well. We both experienced an exhausting brain fog. We can only suspect and don't know anything for sure. All we know is the night didn't add up. We experienced an extreme and unlikely level of intoxication for the amount we drank. Because we don't even know for sure if we were drugged, it's foolish to then suspect anyone of drugging us. But she and I ended up having conspiracy theories anyway. We figured both ended up with a split dose, which is why we both got messed up and were also okay. Hence why I think it was in the water. Jeff had access to my drinks. He probably assumed I would be alone like last week. He saw me drink more the previous week and might assume I would again. But why reject me? Why even drug in the first place when I showed up with a friend? There's not a viable plan to get me out and no motive. There's another possible suspect, if I can call anyone that. Somebody I see around the area a lot and who always gets me the creeps. He was there the week before. He stayed the whole night last Monday, but it's almost too convenient and he'd have a harder time getting anywhere near our drinks unnoticed. Or maybe it was someone random just trying to create chaos. Amelia is getting her blood tested today, but likely will never know or be able to confirm or deny it. I'll talk to the bar just to give them a heads up. Be careful out there. What do you think? I had to think about it, but I believe this happened in the 6th grade. It's hard for me to believe that this took place 20 years ago. One thing I don't remember is what our science project was exactly. All I know is that I got partnered up with this kid in my class named Brian. He seemed like a chill kid at school. He was chubby, quiet, and kind of shy even. When I went to his house to work on our project for the first time, he was apparently much more comfortable and seemed to be very outgoing. He made jokes and laughed a lot more than usual. Kept saying stuff to his mom in Spanish and then they would both laugh at me. But I never thought it was really that mean and I would laugh along, even though I didn't know what they were saying. Usually right afterwards, he would tell me what they had supposedly said. At one point, we were in his room and he asked me to go ask his mom for a line of paper. I told him I didn't speak Spanish and he should go ask her, but he said he would just tell me how to say it. I don't remember exactly, but he told me to say something like it. So I went and asked his mom. I knew something was off right away just by the way she looked at me, like I had said something crazy. She grabbed my hand and walked me to the bathroom like I was a special little boy. Once we were in the bathroom, she pointed at the toilet paper with that confused look still on her face as if to say, "Where the heck else would it be?" I was confused and could only speak to her in English while she spoke to me in Spanish and we didn't understand each other. Soon we heard Brian having a hilarious laughing fit from the other room. Laughing so hard like he thought it was the funniest thing ever, but I was pretty sure it was only kind of funny. I wasn't worried though and I laughed it off. Haha, you got me. Eventually he became really excited to show me something. He told me he'd be right back and then he ran out of his room. He was gone for a minute or so and then returned, telling me to follow him. He was so sure that I was going to love whatever he was about to show me, so I was excited too. Couldn't wait. We get outside and he goes to this little shed and pulls out a lawnmower. He tells me to follow him. He started the mower, began walking, and then gestured with his hand again for me to follow him. As we walked, we rounded a corner and there on the ground was a net full of frogs. There were maybe 20 or more frogs in there. I didn't have time to stop him. Right before it happened, we looked at each other, him looking at me to make sure I was looking, and me looking at him in pure confusion. He pulled back on the mower, raising the blades, and then let the weight of the spinning blades fall down on the writhing pile of rocks. The mower bogged down just for a split second, and there was a sickening wet crunching sound, followed by chunks being spit everywhere as he raised the blades back up. He raised the blades and let them fall on the pile of frogs 4 or 5 times. All the while he was staring at my face and laughing maniacally at my horrified reaction. He released the bar and the mower went silent as he crumpled to the ground and began rolling around on the grass laughing. A couple of frogs escaped without getting blunted. A few more frantically scattered away from the mower, missing limbs. I awkwardly laughed with him and played along like nothing bad had just happened. I never get disgusted to the point of throwing up, and it's hard to disgust me at all. But from that point, I definitely knew there was something wrong with Brian. And until now, I've never told anyone. I wouldn't say that I was afraid. It was just that I didn't think it was a good idea to tell anybody what had happened. Not his mom and not my friends. Not my parents, not my brother or sister or best friend. I didn't tell anyone anything about it, and Brian never did anything like that again or mentioned it. It was the weirdest thing. They say it's the quiet ones you've got to watch out for. I haven't seen him since 6th grade ended, but sometimes I wonder just what kind of person he turned out to be. I've never been a girl who has scared easily. I routinely watch crime shows, horror movies, and stuff. However, a night in March 2005 changed all of that for me. I was attending college for music in 2005 and had recently seen one of my favorite violinists. Inspired, I had asked a pianist friend to accompany me while I played a piece. Looking back, it wasn't smart on our part to go at night to the college's music practice rooms, which are nearly soundproof and separated from the rest of the building. I figured since it was across the street from the campus police headquarters, we would probably be okay. Was I ever wrong? My friend and I are in the practice room for about 15 minutes when she looks at me and says, "Don't freak out, but there's a guy with a mask behind you." Now, this is college. There are plenty of stupid people doing stupid stuff all of the time. When I turned around, I realized this was something much more sinister. There, crouched on the other side of the practice room's glass door, is a thin guy about 5'7", maybe 5'8", wearing a thin blonde curly wig. The Groucho Marx glasses/nose combo thing, a hideous shirt, just a personal judgment, and the creepiest smile ever. That's right, no pants or underwear, just his small penis out. When I turn around, he waves and enters this tiny practice room. My friend and I try to remain calm because we honestly don't know what to do. Then this guy tries to strike up small talk with us and mentions he heard me talking about my favorite violinist. Apparently, he's been standing outside the practice room the entire time. He knows our names, where I had gone that day, where our hometown is, my guy problems at the time, etc. As soon as possible, my friends and I booked it out of there. He was blocking the door most of the time, so we were really scared. As we were leaving, he says, "Let's do it again," with my name. Of course, we go to the campus police department immediately, and they think it's all pretty funny. The next day, I'm sitting in choir when the dean comes in and says, "Hey, a friend of your cousin stopped by today. He said he wanted to give you some CDs of my favorite violinist. He asked for the girl who played violin with your first name, so I assumed it was you." I tell him what happened and he's furious because the campus security didn't do anything. That's when the stalking began. He soon was clever enough not to go by the music office again, but my dorm neighbors would tell me a guy was looking for me to give me some kind of gift. One time a stack of CDs from various violinists was sitting in my assigned seat for choir. Another time they were outside my door. All the while the campus security is doing nothing. Some people even suggested that I should enjoy the attention. Things died down when I finally moved off campus and stopped altogether, when I moved away from the college town. Until 2 years ago when I moved back to the same town. The first week back, I received a direct message on Twitter saying, "Glad you're back. I've missed you. Let's get together and listen to. Insert violinist name here." I reported it to the police, who haven't caught the person to my knowledge. All they knew is the address came from somewhere other than my city. Part of me is still waiting for the knock on the door, or a present left at my work or home. In Pennsylvania, right near the border into Delaware, there was a narrow, eerie place with deformed trees, closed-off paths, and lots of legends. It is formally known as Devil's Road, the main attraction in a place called Satansville, which encompasses the whole of dark twists, isolated roads, and unsettling encounters. It was written about in the book Weird Pennsylvania, which highlights the creepy places of the state. According to many rumors, there is a cult house hidden in the woods surrounding the road, and any trespassers on the road, especially those who stop, will be chased out with a black or white SUV or truck. For years, I had read about the place and heard spine-chilling stories until I couldn't stop thinking about seeing it for myself. My friend Matt and I spent almost every Friday night at the mall together, as teenagers do. As expected, it can get pretty boring pretty fast, especially with no money to actually have a motive to shop around for anything other than disappointment. Visiting Satansville without telling our parents became another weekly tradition of sorts after he told me about his experience a month before our first visit. He had told me that when he visited with his guy friends, his phone service completely cut out, leaving them without Google Maps in a potentially dangerous, unclear area that was already scarcely mapped. Soon after, he told me, a black truck came off of a dirt road and followed closely behind them until they found the main road. It wasn't much, but it was enough for me to be hooked. Not too much happened on our first few trips. We would see other cars rarely, as it's a hidden road that is no longer marked due to excessive theft of the street sign. Occasionally, the cars would be black in color, and we would get a rush of adrenaline. It was fun, but not exactly terrifying, until one night. We finished up at the mall around 6, and we left with enough time to circle around once or twice in daylight, and the remainder of the time in the dark. It was about a 40-minute drive to Satansville from the mall, and I was tingling with excitement. According to the legends, cars that visit frequently are more likely to have experiences at this place, and this would be our third time visiting in the last few weeks. Instead of Matt and I going alone this time, we brought our friend Lola, who was very outgoing and would likely have a sense of humor in a situation that we'd be too scared to continue in normally. We drove down the highway and finally made the first turn, leading to the seclusion. Matt and I had pinpointed several areas where we thought the cult house may be, but stopping on the road is illegal, so we never had a real chance to explore. At least, that's the logical reason I give in lieu of us being major cowards. The ambience immediately changed as we entered Satansville, and the cool night air flooded through the cracked windows. In the first few turns, other people aren't entirely a rare sight. A few trucks pulling out of driveways they like. However, the turn onto Devil's Road never loses its wow factor. The trees on both sides of the narrow road lean away from the forest aggressively, not just a tilt, but completely bending in the trunk away from things we could only imagine. We were approaching the first major bend in the road, and a car was coming up towards us. It was a tight squeeze, nearly impossible for two opposing vehicles to pass. The presence of a car alone was enough to cause a twinge in my gut. Matt was focused on squeezing by while turning, and Lola was too busy cracking jokes to see what I saw, but I have never forgotten the face since then. I looked over to the white Jeep to my left, and the window was incredibly tinted but half down, looking back at me straight into my eyes like he had been looking at me long before I looked to him. He was a young man, maybe 25, with long blonde hair, a deathly pale face, and horribly thin fingers on the steering wheel. He was not at all focused on driving, as his eyes pierced me, and this is the worst part. His neck was turned completely towards me, while the rest of his body was completely straight forward. This may not sound creepy, but it was not normal to bend that way. He said something, but I couldn't hear him over Lola and Matt, laughing at our antics. I couldn't break his gaze. I was stuck staring at him until finally Matt passed the bend and he was gone. I kept checking the rearview windows, terrified with a feeling I'd never quite felt before. When I could no longer see the Jeep, though it felt as though he could still see me, I quietly asked my friends if they'd seen him. Neither of them had looked at him nor felt anything unusual. I was pretty unsettled, yet excited to see what else would happen. We turned off Devil's Road, but were still in Satansville, preparing to loop back around, when we passed a little shack that always housed two black trucks. There was no sign of any other drivers, and we wanted to stir the pot a little bit. We stopped for a few moments and honked the horn and flashed our blinkers, and then kept driving. We also blasted Old Town Road for some reason, because that was our peak of comedy at the time. We looped back around, and were back on Devil's Road when Matt stopped mid-sentence to adjust his mirror. In the darkening distance was a black truck. We giggled with nervous excitement and kept driving. It was exciting, but it kept a reasonable distance, and I think we all kind of assumed it was a coincidence. That is, until we turned off Devil's Road once more and saw that there were no trucks parked by the shack anymore. We lost the truck when we turned on the main road to circle back around again. We circled around 2 more times, nervous but skeptical, and not much happened other than an ass-riding white SUV that kept blinking its headlights. Not going to lie, that freaked us out. And the return of one truck to the shack. This is where it gets really intense. On our 5th loop, we were all very tense. The aura had changed to heavy, and it was completely dark at this point. Things had started to feel more ominous. Probably from the slightly less passive actions taken towards us by whoever was there. We went down the bends, peering nervously into the woods. Some trees were marked with 666 and upside-down crosses. Marks of other, more ballsy teenagers, and there was a distant light in the woods. Courtesy of who knows what. As we turned off Devil's Road, but still in the heart of Satansville, headlights appeared behind us. It was impossible to tell what kind of car it was, as it was pitch black and we had just turned the first major bend. Moments later, the truck appeared behind us, speeding. We were going about 25 probably, and the truck must have floored it to catch up, and it drove uncomfortably close to us. I was the one to see it first. It was a black truck, windows tinted and driver unknown. We drove on for a minute, freaking out and turning completely behind us like creepy Jeep guy. But more normally. Soon, a second truck joined behind it at a fork in the road, and they revved their engines as if in communication. The truck sped up, nearly crashing into us, and we were forced to speed up. This continued through many intense twists and turns where our speed reached up to 70 at the maximum. They flashed their lights, kept speeding up and getting closer. At this point, we were losing our stuff. They were definitely either going to run us off the road or catch us and do who knows what to us. They had these weird red lights on the tops of their trucks, and the light was reflecting off every window in our tiny Honda. Just above a small hill, the main road was visible and relief flooded us. We panicked again, though when we realized we would have to wait for traffic to slow before we could turn, and they would definitely catch us. With nothing else to do, we stopped and glanced behind us. The trucks were gone. We all expected a sudden ambush, but made the turn onto the highway and started home, talking about what the heck just happened. Came to the conclusion that the trucks had probably turned onto a dirt road, only visible to those who know it's there, and that they were chasing us away from their activities. Like the rumors say, what were they doing exactly? We have no idea, and we have no intention of finding out, as we hadn't been back since, and I still can't get the face and presence of the man in the Jeep out my head, and this was over a year ago now. I was a teenager in the 90s, and on this particular night, had found myself stuck downtown. It was around midnight when I finally found a semi-well-lit bus stop. I looked at the bus schedule and realized I may have missed the last bus of the night, unless it was late. I decided to wait on the bench. Moments later, a tall man walked up and sat right next to me. There was plenty of space to sit elsewhere for him, but he huddled up nice and close. He was wearing all black, including a black leather jacket. He started making smooth conversation with me, and I finally looked over at him. He was very tan and had shiny wavy black hair and orange eyes, like bright hazel orange, snake-looking eyes, which contrasted with his dark features and clothes. He really looked like the devil in person to me. He took off his leather jacket and laid it across my lap to keep me warm. I took it off and handed it back to him and said no thanks. He kept draping it back on my lap. I looked around for other people and only saw a passed out homeless person sleeping on the bench. He was trying to coerce me into getting a ride with him because it's so late and he was worried about me. And my bus isn't coming, I'm not safe. I said, no thanks, my bus should be here any minute. In my mind, I didn't know if the bus would be here at all. The streets were dead and dark, and I was scared to leave the only spot that was well lit. After what seemed like an eternity, my bus finally came. It was the most beautiful bus I'd ever seen. I quickly got up and said, "My bus is here." He sneered at the bus and said under his breath, "You got lucky." I got on the bus and saw out the window him walking to his car in a dark parking lot across the street from where the stop was. He stood next to his car waving at me to come to him, as if that would change my mind. It obviously did not. I was a wild teen that partied a lot and would stay downtown all hours of the night and thought I was an invincible. But after that incident, I never stayed out that late again, especially alone. I really did get lucky and had no intention of pushing it again. I went to school in New Orleans from 2010 to 2012, and I encountered the scariest man I've ever known while attending. My friend from high school and I both lived there at the time. We met up to smoke a small joint on the outskirts of a nearby park. She was struggling heavily with money, for both tuition and everything else, and I was smoking her out for a pick-me-up. While smoking, a man emerged from a white house across the street from the park, one of the nice Garden District homes. He carried his bike over his shoulder and was headed straight for us. We quickly put out our joint when we saw his eyes locked on us, and we initiated friendly conversation. He introduced himself as Ty. He was tan with piercing blue eyes, probably in his late 30s, and seemed pretty athletic. We asked if the nice house was his, and he said he was staying with his friends. He ran back and retrieved 2 beers for us, both unopened, so we accepted. This was a poor choice, but he was insistent. We were already pretty high, and we were a little afraid that he would screw us over if we said no. He pulled out a ring of cards while telling us how he was a model, refusing to tell us what exactly he'd done in the past. The cards all seemed pretty worn and old, but he insisted that they were his press passes. He noticed immediately that I was asking some overly specific questions and was pretty uncomfortable, while my friend, much more trusting, was enthralled. He latched onto her, telling her that he was doing a shoot in New Orleans for the Saints, working for ESPN. She would be paid, he said, and saw her light up upon hearing this. Her phone was off, so she told me to give him my number to communicate. I was pretty mad at this point. He kept making backhanded comments intended to make me feel like the outsider for questioning him. It's not for everyone. This is how you make it in this world with a pretty face. And things of that nature. Putting on a show of fawning over my friend. Sociopaths tend to single people out like that, I learned. I soon heard from him on a daily basis. He would ask how his little lady was doing, my friend, ask for her Facebook and ask for her class schedule, and I told him that I doubted she would be okay with that. She would have been, but she was playing a dangerous game, so I tried to intercept his advances. He found me on Facebook soon enough, though my information was not linked to my number, and I was receiving messages constantly asking for my friend. I thought that if I blocked him, he would continue to hunt me down in crazier ways, or tell somebody about the weed. Young and stupid. So I allowed the barrage of messages. I refused to help him and made my friends aware that he was starting to scare me. I was leaving town with my friend a few months later for Christmas, and told him the week before we actually left that we were both gone indefinitely, as his messages got more and more aggressive as time went on. He freaked out, but it seemed like he would leave me alone in the end. However, every time I went to the park, which was daily in my last week because I was smoking a ton of pot after finals, just keeping it real here, I would see him on his bike, circling the track around the park. I didn't think much of it, nor did I think he could see me because I was with a group and away from the track, and he never acknowledged anyone being there. The day before we actually left, I received several blurry images of the original friend and me lying in the grass on the different days we came together, which wasn't every time I was there. It was obvious that we were smoking pot, so again, young and foolish, we didn't go to the cops. When I got back to my dorm on the same day, placed on the sidewalk by the back entrance I always used, which was rarely trafficked, was an ESPN press pass with the name Tyler Durden, piercing blue eyes staring up at me. It was like it had been laid right in the center of the walkway. That was probably the most frightening moment of my life, and I packed up and stayed with friends until my flight out. I received phone calls from numbers I didn't have throughout Christmas. making my life miserable. Every sound in my house I feared would be him, finding me at the address with my name attached to it. He was livid, texting in all caps from various numbers that I was a little liar, that I was just a stoner and I was never model material and I was jealous of my smoking friends, implying that he knew of more than just one of my friends. That liars get raped and he would destroy my pothead life, and he'd go into really weirdly worded babbling rants that scared the ever-loving shit out of me. I was scared to tell anyone in my life. I was the good kid who had gotten herself into the stupidest situation. I just hoped he would move on. A week before I was supposed to go back to school, he just stopped. From daily rampages and rants to nothing. I was so relieved until in February I checked my email to find a crime alert warning students of a serial rapist going by Tyler Durden, who lured women to his home, gave them alcohol and assaulted them. His real name is Dean Kelly. A has-been model from an Aerosmith video, baiting, stalking, and assaulting underage girls at schools in Chicago, Texas, and New Orleans. He keeps making it out of jail on bail and contacting his victims, pretending to be other victims who want to talk. Thankfully, I'm not one of them. Screw this guy. I still live in fear years later. This happened a few years ago with my friend June when we were maybe 17 or 18. I'm 23 now. We were out driving around late at night on country back roads. We were teenagers growing up in a rural area, so going for a drive was one of the main ways we passed the time. We were both into goth stuff and witchcraft at the time, so we pulled off the side of the road to walk around a small graveyard in the woods. It was impossible to see at night, but we'd gone there a few times the day before just to hang out. The whole area is heavily forested, but the path to the graveyard is short. It's right next to the road, just barely hidden in the woods. Anyways, we started slowly on the small loop that takes you around all the gravestones, using our flashlights to read the names and look at the carvings of the stones. I was very comforted by graveyards and the night at the time, so I was honestly very relaxed, and we mused about ghosts and death and whatnot as goth teenagers do. About halfway around the loop, at the furthest point from the car, June got my attention as she'd noticed a light in the woods. It looked far away, like it could have been a car on the road, so we turned away and kept walking. However, about 30 seconds later, she got my attention again, and the light was much closer and obviously quickly moving towards us, and then I heard the sound of someone crashing through the woods. It was obviously someone with a flashlight making a beeline toward us, and we backtracked and ran to the car. I unlocked it and climbed into the driver's seat, turning the car on as fast as I could, and right before the lights came on, this huge grisly-looking man, dressed head to toe in camouflage, carrying a huge crossbow and wearing a headlamp, busted out of the foliage and was coming right for the car. He has this manic look in his eyes that just made me want to escape this even more, and I reversed as quickly as I could and peeled out of there. We didn't stop driving for a while. Even though we never saw him following us after we drove off, we both couldn't shake the feeling that we were being followed. Finally, I think we both got too tired to stay out any longer and we went back to our houses, but I still constantly think about how quickly he got to us. If we hadn't sprinted right when we did, he would have caught us as we were getting into the car. I literally slammed my door about a second before he came barreling out of the woods towards us. Plus, the fact that there are no houses nearby. This person was waiting in the woods in full hunting gear with a weapon. And we clearly weren't animals as we had a flashlight. And there was a no trespassing sign in sight. The whole area around this graveyard is state park. I go out into the woods and into weird places in the night a lot, and I've seen some stuff I would consider supernatural that really scared me. But none of those things ever truly made me afraid to go into the woods like he did. I still go out on my own, but I never let my guard down like I used to. So, this started on one of those meet new friends apps. I'm not just a huge loser, I swear. I moved to my current city during the pandemic and have a work from home position, so it just hasn't been the prime circumstances for a social life. I matched with this random girl that we'll call Annie. I can't remember if I saw her first or vice versa. Honestly, I was paying more attention to the profiles than the pictures, and she seemed okay. Spirituality came up somehow. I can't remember how this happened either, and to be fair, it could have been either of us. I've recently been more seriously following Norse paganism, but it wasn't something I was seeking to explore with other people. It's mostly a private thing, not to mention my own beliefs are more metaphorical. But that doesn't mean I'm close to the experience entirely. So when she mentioned having an LGBTQ neurodivergent pagan femme coven, I was like, okay, wow, that's either very specific or very broad, but hey, why not? Maybe it'll be fun. So we agreed to meet first before I went to the event. One weird thing that stuck out in our text conversation was that her partner was in some bizarre Scientology rehab. At first, I assumed this was a place where one recovers from Scientology, but I did ask her if her partner was a Scientologist. I didn't get an answer. We only met for an hour to have coffee. I think more red flags would have popped up if we had more time, because the little things that went off on my radar were things that weren't that weird. Like they were explanations, or I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt, and my dumbass didn't ask again about the Scientology thing. I kept meaning to Google Scientology rehab, but kept forgetting to do it. I've since Googled it and can't find anything about a rehabilitation for ex-Scientologists, so I wish I'd done that sooner. There were, however, other things that stuck out. They're relatively benign out of context, but putting everything together in retrospect made me feel dumb. She wouldn't answer any direct questions about herself, and not for lack of asking. I'm the kind of person who is conscious of when the attention is all on me, so it made me uncomfortable, and I didn't learn anything about her really. Most of what she had said had to do with her spiritual awakening. Her spiritual awakening itself sounded weird as heck. She said that she had a realization that she was like a lighthouse that was drawing people toward their personal enlightenment. And, okay, I did think this was weird, but, like, she's from California. I don't know, maybe that's kind of normal. I just chalked it up to her personal beliefs being whatever they were. Reincarnation came up. Reincarnation is a big part of paganism, although Asatru additionally focuses on your ancestors. She told me she didn't think she had any past lives and was a new soul, which didn't make a lot of sense, but okay, whatever. Not my circus, not my monkeys. The vaguely supernatural element she placed on herself was strange, but I know a lot of people want to feel special. That didn't mean I had to believe it. At one point, I told her about this random woman I met at the pagan festival who tried to con me. She wanted to charge me so I could be under her wing or whatever. I don't need someone to protect or guide me, so I declined. As I was telling this story, I could tell Annie was conflicted. Like she wanted to agree but didn't. Finally, she said something blasé, like how it was only inappropriate because the student should choose the teacher. So I clarified that I did not want a teacher. Her response was very mirroring, and I'm not a moron. I was getting a weird sense that she wasn't being honest with me, that she was telling me things that I wanted to hear, and I told myself that she was probably just nervous. I have a strong personality. I'm very independent, so I can understand if somebody wouldn't want to go up against the things I said at our very first meeting. I know I'm just dumb at this point, but I didn't want to be paranoid. I don't trust people easily, and I know that, so I was trying to loosen up and be more chill. Yeah, that was a big mistake. So I go to this thing. Immediately, it's weird, guys. Immediately. The second I step foot in that house, I'm uncomfortable. It's filled with people and completely silent. Everybody's looking at me. I'm laughing and saying hi, and no one is like really responding. And here I am awkwardly dropping my keys and phone while everyone is just watching me. Eventually, I take a seat on this short couch because there's no room in the large circle. It's a very small living room and there are like 20 people circled up. There's a cushion on the couch, so I sit on that. The leader starts talking, and as she's going on, I'm looking around at the people there. I was curious. Out of the corner of my eye, I see the leader trying to look at me. The girl sitting in front of me is partially blocking our view of each other, so the leader is like leaning over to try and meet my gaze. Finally, I felt awkward enough to shift over so that I was leaning against the arm of the couch. Staying perched on a cushion was uncomfortable by that point, so I shifted off and spread out a bit to be more comfortable. The leader ended the speech with, "So, spread out, I guess," which was clearly directed at me. It was said with some humor though, so I wasn't sure what to make of it. Everybody introduces themselves and are their own unique brand of neurodivergent. I'm ADHD, but I guess I don't subscribe to labels beyond the requirement to stay medicated. I've been medicated since 2015, so this isn't a new diagnosis for me. That was the only question we got asked about ourselves beyond our name. The leader guides us through this meditation, and people are making these weird breathing sounds and hums. I get it. It's spiritual, right? Unfortunately, my ADHD ass can't focus to save my life, and it's impossible for me to follow the guided meditation. I do not understand. How can anyone with actual attention issues listen to past trills and deep noise breathing? So I'm sitting there with my eyes closed and barely paying attention, because I can't. But I do hear the leader say that we should think of anything we'd want to ask her or need from her, and that got my attention. What the heck did I need to ask her? Other than where the snacks were, because I paid $8 and don't see a single one. Once the meditation ended, Annie and the leader walked around to give us material for an activity. Annie gave me 2 long pieces of twine, and the leader gave me 2 sticks. As the leader was handing me the sticks, I asked her where the snacks were. She was like, "In the kitchen on the table where the snacks tend to be." I'm a dry, sarcastic person, so I thought it was her brand of humor. I laughed and played along with, "Oh, alright, I think I'll find them." Literally, she was deadpan, unsmiling. And then walked away. So stupid me thought she just might be like that, but then I saw her laughing with the other girls and realized something was off. As the activity commenced, she went back over to Annie and started stroking her back, kissing her hair and giving me this creepy smile. Yeah, it was very weird. I was so uncomfortable I wanted to get up and go, but I couldn't. Why? Because of this damn activity. The activity was the last straw. They wanted us to think of something we wanted to discard that brought us pain. Then they wanted us to feel how bad that thing made us feel as we slowly twisted the piece of twine around the stick. That's stuff I would only ever do with my therapist. Obviously, people were emotionally melting down before long. I wasn't comfortable doing the activity for obvious reasons, so I sat there awkwardly with the sticks and the string in my lap. I was the only one not doing it, and it was obvious. But because I wasn't doing it, I had the opportunity to watch Annie and the leader, and it was chilling. Annie was doing some weird pyramid thing above her head with her arms. There were a lot of references to her being a lighthouse or some sort of guiding figure throughout the meeting. She was the only one who wasn't doing the ritual, other than the leader. They were both running it. Suddenly, it occurred to me, as it probably did to y'all already, that Annie had just been using this app just to bring people into their group. She was the only person who seemed to know everyone, yet no one there knew each other. Even the name of the group now made sense. They weren't being specific, they were casting a wide net. And I had this big realization in a handful of seconds. It made my stomach turn. So yeah, I was done, but I couldn't get up, because people were sharing their experiences and stuff, pouring their hearts out. This was the most messed up part of it, in my opinion. There's no reason to do a releasing ceremony that forces people to feel their trauma, especially at the very first meeting. It's also inherently manipulative because it requires people to let their guard down. Then they can quote-unquote save the day by showing people how to release the very same pain they just inflicted. But that isn't the fault of people there, so I didn't want to disrespect them. Like people were crying on top of my shoes that I left by the door. I had to wait for the best time to ask somebody to pass them to me. Finally, I got up and told everyone I had to go to the car, then took off. I texted Annie and told her I wouldn't be back and that I hope she found her people. Just make sure you're not her people. Be really careful of any spiritual ceremony or practice that demands vulnerability from you, especially directed by people who don't know you beyond a name. Annie, let's not meet under any circumstances, please. And if y'all ever hear the term neurodivinity, run. If ADHD made me divine, then I'd be on my 94th incarnation by now. Hey folks, I'm kind of new and this is the first story I've submitted here, so let's get started. I must clarify that this didn't happen only to me, but to my uncle too. This was after the Christmas Eve party, when everybody went home. I decided to stay because my cousin and I were watching a movie. My uncle, who used to walk his dogs into the woods next to a park, went out to take them out. Before this, my aunt told him not to do that because it was too dark out there. It was around 4 or 5 a.m. He didn't care much and he went off anyway. My aunt was still worried, so I went along with them. Once there, anything wrong seemed to happen. Everything was quiet. My uncle and his dogs were having a relaxing walk, and I wasn't really paying attention to the surroundings when suddenly the dogs went still. This wasn't that strange. They always stopped on their way to stare and to bark at other animals they noticed, like rats or birds, even insects or other dogs. However, this time was different. When the dogs got still, my uncle and I noticed something that was going wrong. The dogs weren't angry or curious. They were actually kind of nervous, anxious, or afraid. One of the dogs, the largest one, was growling and shaking. As my uncle started to get worried about the situation, we heard it. People in the woods. We didn't see how many because of the darkness, but they were saying something. We all gather here, by the blood of incomprehensible, we incomprehensible, the in thy incomprehensible, etc. As my uncle and I heard that, he yelled for his dogs to follow him out of the woods. As we all left, he turned his head back and he only saw a slight movement of branches and shrubs, perhaps because these people were trying to hide. After all that happened, he hasn't walked his dogs near these woods, nor when it gets dark. So, to the strangers in the woods, let's not meet. I haven't posted an experience in some years, but this one happened recently. I was behind the scenes at the restaurant I was working at, waiting to clock in for my shift. That's when I first noticed her. Starboat Girl. This chick loves that gothic kids movie about the blue-haired girl and the button-eyed doll. The clothing associated with the marketing of the movie is always a dark blue bow with silver stars. Now, when I'm not at work in our dress code, I'm usually goth or close to it. I enjoy looking more like a rock star than wearing just jeans, and yes, I own jeans too. I just prefer to wear darker clothes, so I immediately noticed this girl because of her bow. I remember that movie, even though I'm an adult, so I make a mental note that, maybe this chick is alternative too, and I might get along well with her. Fast forward to a few weeks later, now everyone else avoids this girl. I notice, but figure people are being mean. I admit she is kind of weird, but weird never scared me, so when she starts to say hi, I politely say hi back. I pick up a shift on a day I don't normally work, and she's there waiting to clock in. After exchanging greetings, she starts to engage and we talk a little bit. I like to joke a bit at work, so I say something kind of edgy and she laughs. And I clock in and that was it. I didn't notice until later, but I never used to work with her. I mean, barely. We work in different areas of the restaurant, so it was whatever it was, and I don't really think anything about it until one day. I'm at my lunch in the break room, which is quite a walk from our restaurant to get to, and more like a bungalow that is attached behind the property. I am sitting at one of 6 tables. Each table has 2 chairs. Starbo sits right across from me. I look up for my chips and dip, and there is no one else in there but her and me. She asks, "Can I have a chip? I forgot to bring a snack for my break." At first I'm thinking I don't like to share my own food with people I don't know. I'm just not raised that way, so my instinct is to say no, but she flashes up the dough eyes and I crumble. "Yeah, sure," I reply. She scoots my dip out of my hands and under her chin and proceeds to grab fist after fistful of my chips and chow down. It's like a movie scene. It actually made me sick. I'll spare you the details, but this chick double dips, slops, and belches. Yeah, no thank you. My food is done. I am not eating after that. I make up an excuse to head back to our location. I'm pretty upset, but at the end of the day, it's my fault. I mean, I said she could have some. I feel like she guilted me into it. Never again, I tell myself. A week later, click, clock in for my shift. Guess who is standing behind me? Starboat Girl. She doesn't normally work today. I don't normally get anxious, but she's making me feel that way. I avoid saying hi and duck out to my area to work. On my break, here she comes. She is walking behind me and says something about spending break together, and I say, "No, you go on. I gotta use the toilet." And I fast walk towards the bathroom. At lunch, I'm not so lucky. Plops down at my table. The room is virtually empty. Maybe one guy half asleep in the back. I'm on my phone scrolling and eating my TV dinner. She asks if I am having a good day. At first, I completely ignore her. Then she gets louder. I say something bland like, "Just hanging in there." I was in the middle of my meal and my box from it was still sitting on the table. I'm quiet, ignoring her, playing on my phone or pretending to. Starbo starts picking up my trash and reading it. I'm taken aback. "What are you doing?" I say. She slowly says in a casual kind of way, "Just curious, what you're eating." I am so upset. I want to do something, but something she can't get me fired for. I start talking about really macabre and Debbie Downer stuff, anything I can think of. I tell her my opinions on canceled forensic shows and Armageddon, tragic accidents, and everything I could do to put a bitter taste in her mouth. I figure this girl is too weird for my blood and too creepy even for me to have a friendship with. I'm overly excited about my newfound rise to turn this girl off that as I'm talking I finish my food and a noodle goes down the wrong pipe. Great. Now I'm choking. I'm freaking choking. This girl might be the last person I ever see. I can't believe it. She turns to me and says chillingly, her eyes turning dark, "You're going to die from that." More determined now to live than my thinly little gothic mind ever was, I tell myself, "Find water," and I will myself over to the water cooler halfway across the break room. Luckily we had paper cups which sometimes ran out. I chug water and cough and gasp, and finally, and obviously because I'm typing this, I survived. But I am fuming angry at Starbo. This chick wouldn't even get me water. I get it, I was turning her off, but this whole thing started because she was stalking me. I grab my stuff and go to my supervisor and report it. My supervisor is so lax. Says the company can't do anything, that she is within her rights to be around me. I keep avoiding her. The last time I saw her, she came up behind me before she clocked in and stabbed me with her pointer finger in my back. Smiled at me when I turned around to see who it was, and ran to go clock into her area for her shift. Now she works the same shifts as I do. I think she changed her availability to be near me. I also think she has been getting breaks and lunches close to mine, so she can come hunt me down in her breaks. I really don't know what to do besides report her or make up an excuse again to leave if she finds me. Back in 2008, I was a student planning to go to university and needed some extracurricular stuff I could put on my entry applications. As most UK students know, one of the best to have on there is the Duke of Edinburgh Award. As part of this award, you have to embark on an orienteering expedition, basically a long trek through woodland and rural villages following nothing but a map and a compass. No GPS allowed. It is a teamwork experience and you camp and overcome hurdles together. Anyways, I was out of shape at the time, and so my uncle volunteered to take me out of the middle of nowhere to get some idea of what orienteering was like. We didn't stay out overnight like what I would have to during the real thing, but we hiked maybe 10 miles through woods in a small village in pretty abysmal weather. By the end of the journey, we were soaked to the bone and pretty miserable, looking forward to getting back to the car and heading home. For the last part of the journey, we were on a dirt trail heading uphill with bushes and trees on either side. We were marching onward in silence at this point when all of a sudden there was a rustling in the foliage to our left. From behind a large bush stepped an old man in a black suit with a red bow tie and dress shoes. He looked late 70s, early 80s, very pale with liver spots dotting his face, and a gray/white comb-over. I was instantly weirded out. Who dresses like that to go into the woods? The instant thought seeing a guy his age out there in those clothes in those weather conditions was, this guy's lost his marbles. There was something else that took me an extra moment to notice though. That absolutely puzzled me. The guy was bone dry, didn't even have mud on his shoes. We stopped in our tracks and just stared at the man for a moment, who appeared to be as frozen and shocked at seeing us. My uncle made the first move, taking a step towards him, asking him if he was okay. The old man continued to stare for a moment, not moving even a twitch, then became suddenly very animated. It was like he suddenly snapped out of a trance. He started flailing his arms wildly, saying something awful had happened, that a good friend of his needed help. He began walking backwards into the woods, motioning for us to follow him, which we did. We started off at a brisk walk and then escalated to running as we struggled to keep up with the man. After about a minute, he disappeared ahead of us, but we could hear him, so we continued to follow the noise until we reached a huge slope. We stopped at the edge and looked down to see the old man standing at the bottom, motioning us still, pleading with us to follow him. I remember looking down, and the slope was probably at a 40-degree angle, spanned for perhaps 50 feet or more, and was slick with mud. It looked like an accident waiting to happen, especially given there were no shrubs or roots to hold on to anything. I remember looking down at the old man on the other side of the slope and wondering, how the heck did he cross that so quickly and so cleanly? I mean, at that distance, it is hard to see fine detail clearly, but I swear he still did not appear to be wet or muddy at all. I and my uncle looked at each other, and I saw that he was getting as weirded out as I was. Despite my feelings, I made a step toward the edge and was going to try and make my way down when my uncle grabbed me firmly by the arm and pulled me back. Under his breath, he said to me, "Something's wrong here." We took a few steps back from the edge at this point, and the old man at the bottom started getting irate. He began pleading with us again to come down the slope, telling us that he needed our help. His friend was in major trouble. My uncle shouted down to the old man that he would head back to our car and call emergency services for him, that professional help would be on its way soon, that they would have all the tools to help him. The old man suddenly got furious. He began jumping up and down, demanding that we come to the slope right now or we would regret it. His voice had changed drastically. He was practically growling his words, his hands bunched up into fists, pounding his knees like an angry toddler throwing a tantrum. I've never seen a grown adult fly into such a rage in my life. His eyes looked like they were on the verge of bursting out of their sockets. His skin had gone from pale to red in almost an instant. We began to hurriedly make our way back the way we came, his demands and threats getting less audible as we got closer to the trail. Once on the trail, we practically power marched the remaining quarter mile or so to the car. All the while, my uncle was on the phone to the emergency services, explaining to them that there was a possibly mentally ill old man wandering the trail. We were ordered to get to our car and await the police so we could show them where we had encountered him. About an hour later, we met 4 officers, 2 of whom had dogs with them and packs of supplies like first aid, emergency blankets and stuff. We led them to the exact spot and then pointed the 2 officers with dogs in the direction he led us through the bushes. The search lasted all weekend, but there was no trace of the old man. Officers said the only trail they could pick up had been mine and my uncle's. They didn't find any footprints or anything belonging to the old man we encountered. One of my weirdest experiences to date. When I was a kid, I lived in a pretty normal, semi-rural suburb of a major US city. When this started in 1997, I was 6. My brother was 3 and my half-sister was 18. My sister made the dean's list at her university her first 2 semesters, so we went out to dinner to celebrate. The 5 of us, along with my grandparents, went to a seafood restaurant chain in a nearby city. It was connected to a mall and our table was by a window that looked out into the hallway of the mall. Shortly after ordering, I looked up from my coloring to see a woman staring in the window at us. She had long, stringy, mousy-colored hair, big glasses, and a longish olive green coat. She made me nervous from the get-go. Next time I looked up, she was no longer in the hallway of the mall, but in the restaurant. She was standing at the host stand, ignoring the host's questions about how many people she would be dining with. She was still staring at our table. Eventually, she requested to be seated at the bar, where she could still see our table. I finally pointed out to my grandmother that somebody was staring at us. She pointed it out to the waiter, and he said that unfortunately there wasn't much that he could do unless she actually harassed us. So we finished our meal uneasily, all of us aware that this woman was staring. After dinner, we walked around the mall. The woman followed us into American Eagle, which at the time wasn't so teenager-oriented, and that could have been coincidental. But afterwards, she followed us into Limited Too, a clothing store for young girls. She didn't look at any of the clothing, just my mom, brother, sister, and me. My mom told an employee that the woman had been following us, and she left the store. She sat on a bench outside and watched us while we purchased clothing for me. She followed us the rest of the evening, never going into the stores after us, just throughout the mall. My dad, who had been pretty nonchalant about the issue at the beginning, finally was getting creeped out and we left. A few weeks later, I saw this same woman in a car outside of my summer daycare. I began to cry and told the aide that the woman had followed us around the mall. The aide went up to the woman and asked her to leave or she would call the cops. We had on occasion had other creeps watch the daycare's playground, and the cops had to be called. Then she came to our church. It was almost September at this point, with these events starting in June. She attended one service, sitting on the opposite side of the congregation area from where we were. There were 3 sections of pews, one straight out from the pulpit and stage, and 2 on the sides at a 45-degree angle from the stage. My family was on one side and she was on the other. We informed the pastor, and he targeted her in a very pastorally way, inviting her to new member classes, asking how she found out about the church, and what drew her to this church, etc. She apparently was fairly unresponsive and never showed up again. We didn't see her again for a few years, at least not in any way that was as obvious as it was in 1997. My sister swears she saw the woman on her university's campus a few times her sophomore year, 1997 to 1998. My mom and dad thought they saw her at a local music festival in the summer of 1999. I thought she was in a museum while on a school field trip in 1999. Started crying and was basically told I was imagining things by my teacher. In 2001, she showed up again. Every year, the Girl Scouts had a big slumber party at my elementary school. All of the Brownie and Junior troops had dinner, played games, had events, worked on badges, and had a big sleepover in the gym. The elementary school I went to had these gates that closed off sections of the school, I assume for security reasons. The offices, gym, cafeteria, and health room were all on one end of the L-shaped building. The rest of the school was closed off to us by a locked gate. I walked out of the gym and looked down the hallway into the locked part, and a few classrooms down there was a janitor. It wasn't just a random after-hours janitor though, it was the woman. I bursted into tears and ran and hid in the bathroom until my troop leader called my mom. She picked me up and took me home. On Monday morning, my mom inquired about the woman with the school. It turns out that she had been hired as an after-hours janitor by the district about a year prior. She had worked at a different school for about a year before transferring to my elementary school, a few weeks back before I saw her. My mom told the school about the incidents in the late 1990s, and the school seemed skeptical. I ended up getting cast in the school play for a few weeks later, and would be at school after hours, so same time as this woman. She was often at the gate, staring into the gym, watching our rehearsals. She must have started at 4 p.m. since she was never actually in the gym, only on the other side of the gate, and that's when they shut the gates. I told the director that the woman was watching, having realized that people thought the stalking aspect of this was a figment of my imagination. The director did tell the school they saw the woman on the security camera watching us, rather than doing her job, and fired her. They informed my mom that the woman was fired as well. Once again, it all stopped in any obvious ways. I was driving with my dad one day and saw her in a car in 2002. My brother saw her at the park that his Boy Scout troop had an event in once. My sister saw her at the restaurant she worked at in 2002, as well, and refused to serve her, getting a coworker to do so. She said the woman never stopped staring at her. It stopped again until 2008. I was 18 and was at Culver's, a Wisconsin-based fast food and custard chain, with my boyfriend. We were at a table eating when the woman walked in. He visibly froze, just as I did. Apparently, his family had the same issue with the woman that we did. There were a few instances of her actually stalking them, His dad owned a restaurant for a time, and she would come in and ask people about the owner's kids, but refused to talk to the owner or would go silent if he approached. For them, this started in 2000 when he was 8-ish and his sisters were 5 and 1. Like my family, they saw the woman in the background for years, including at the elementary school that we both went to. This means that at least 2 families independently complained about this woman, and the school did nothing about it for months, even though she had allegations of stalking at least 4 students. We promptly left the restaurant. She didn't notice us, presumably because we were 16 and 18, pretty grown up with their crazy hair and piercings and skinny jeans. But she'd followed both of our families around, just watching from the background for years. I can't help but wonder how many other families she followed like that too. I'll never know what this man's intentions were, but I am thankful I listened to my gut anyways, even if it took me a hot minute to smarten up. At the time that this happened, I didn't think much of it until looking back on it from the perspective of an adult more mature and wiser. Now, as I revisit the memory of this encounter, I am convinced something more sinister was at play, but I'll never know for sure. I was 17, and as teenagers tend to be, a lot less cautious than a young girl of my age ought to be, in a new country completely foreign to her. I was on vacation with my family to escape the cold winter weather up north. My parents were very liberal about giving me the breathing room I desired, and I wasted no opportunity to use that to my advantage, as much as I was afforded. It was a family resort and nobody was all that concerned about anything happening. We all had our vacation blinders on, so to speak. Every night after the sun went down, I liked to wander off to the pool to swim and soak in the hot tub, while my parents stayed in their rooms. When you're basking in the lap of luxury at a high-end resort, you don't think about the potential for danger. In hindsight, I suppose this is why tourists are considered ideal targets for predatory activity. Being on vacation made me more sociable and, additionally, more trusting than I normally would be. I admit that the false security that came from being within the illusory security of this protected resort caused me to lower my guard substantially. The fact that I'd already been going to and from the pool area by myself every night, with no incident thus far, only heightened my cavalier nonchalance. While my parents gave me the breathing room to enjoy my independence, I was here to make friends and have a good time. I didn't care about much else. So, just like any other night during my stay, I was lounging in the hot tub, chattering amongst the guests, all of my worries completely forgotten for the moment. I was getting a lot of attention, mainly because it was apparent that I was Canadian, and all the guests amongst me were apparently fascinated by this. I was barraged with questions, some of which I could not decipher whether they were genuine or trolling. Yes, we do have heat and electricity up north. I kid you not, I was actually asked this. Amongst this group of people, I was particularly invested in this conversation I was having with a much older man, who came off as nothing but warm and friendly. He had claimed he too was on vacation with his family, but they were nowhere to be seen. In fact, he, not including me of course, was the only one who seemed to not know anyone there. Everybody else was with their families. I figured that was normal enough. However, because I too was vacationing with my family, and they were nowhere in sight either. What strikes me as odd, however, is how he seemed to be engaging only me in conversation and ignoring everybody else. He was nearly 3 times my age. Doesn't help matters. As the night progressed, people began retreating to their rooms, leaving just me, this man and a few others. It was around this time that he shared with me what room he was staying at before asking, innocently, where I was staying. Foolishly told him, but only the sectional area. Although he had asked which room specifically, I had enough sense to not divulge that much. Things didn't take a particularly unsettling turn until I began to notice how eerily quiet things had become. There was still some people around, but it was just me and him in the hot tub now. I took this as my cue to start heading back. Bidding him goodbye, I got up to leave, but he instantly stopped me, insisted that he walk me back to my room, as it's not safe for a pretty little thing like me to be wandering around the resort by myself at this late hour of the night. I took this with concern akin to a protective uncle, but waved off the supposed hospitality, insisting I would be alright. He became more persistent, switching from concerned guardian to fear-mongerer. He told me how bad things happen to young girls like me without an escort. As he droned on about the dangers that might surely befall me as a young female on vacation, with no parents around to guard me, a small defenseless young girl, I felt the first wave of unease wash over me. I shook it off and smiled warmly, telling him thank you, but that I would manage fine on my own. He seemed to deflate as his expression became more exasperated. At least let me walk you part of the way there until I know you're safe. This puzzled me. If there were predators lurking, how would I be any safer walking from the halfway point than from where I was now, besides it being a shorter trek? Nevertheless, this show of concern was beginning to wear me down. He had gotten me thinking about how dark it was now, and the vulnerable position I was in. He was right, kind of. I practically had a target on my back. Okay. I nodded after a moment of hesitation. I was young and naive and thought it to be an advantage to have somebody bigger and stronger walk with me. I know I was incredibly foolish and a sheltered teenager, with far too much faith in humanity as a whole. Very unlike the cynical and distrustful woman I am now who always follows her gut. I also, as annoyingly typically as this sounds, did not want to be rude. Fortunately, I have since grown out of my people-pleasing complex and will not hesitate to say no when I feel weird at the first sign of a red flag, but I had yet to develop this quality then. I hesitantly relented. At the moment, my fear of coming off as rude to an adult overrode that of any subconscious or otherwise concern I had for my safety. His eyes lit up and he nodded approvingly. Good. Let's get going then. It's late and your parents will worry. I ignored the twisting in my gut and rose from the hot tub, shivering from the sudden exposure of the cold air. Suddenly feeling too exposed, I hastily fastened my towel around myself, padded towards the lockers. At this point, I was just determined to get back to safety and warmth of my hotel room. It was only as I was getting closer to leaving that I began to get this sinking feeling in my stomach that something about this whole night just wasn't right. My suspicions were further affirmed as I took note of my escort following me. The lockers were outside and the women's changing room was to the left of them. I was going to retrieve my clothes from the locker, change in the locker room, and then go. With this complete stranger who I didn't know at all. I noticed he was standing a little too closely now, and I instinctively shrunk away from him. This definitely wasn't right, but it wasn't until I was shakily pulling my top on over my soaked bikini top, having already decided I would skip the locker room, which regrettably accented my womanly curves a little bit more than I was comfortable with at the moment, and which he seemed to notice as well, that I decided I could not wander off with this strange man that I hardly knew. Any last bit of false security had waned away the moment I felt his eyes on me, watching me dress, his eyes clearly appraising my body. I shivered again, this time not from the cold. As I pulled on the rest of my clothes, I had already made my decision. You know, I really appreciate you offering to walk me back, but I think I'll manage after all. Thank you, though. He grew solemnly quiet, which stirred a growing sense of malaise within me as I began to feel more and more validated in my decision to not go off with this man. Are you sure? He pressured. I would hate for anything to happen to you. I nodded more insistently and forced a smile. Nah, it's alright, I'll be fine, thanks. Okay, he said quietly as I practically started running for the exit. While still in earshot behind me, I heard him say, You be careful now. You never know who might be out there. As soon as I was out of sight, I began bolting and was stopped in my tracks, instantly by the second wave of impending dread to hit me that night. I decided against walking back on foot and headed towards the on-resort shuttle instead. On the way, on two separate occasions within the space of no more than 10 minutes, two older men in their 50s made a pass at me, and at the shuttle stop, a group of men in a car offered to give me a ride, but I ended up making it back to safety from the shuttle without any further incident. Later, I wrote it off as paranoia and convinced myself that he really was just a hospital older man with a young girl's best interest at heart. And now that I know from personal experience how the men that seem the nicest with seemingly good intentions can often be the worst predators, I am convinced I made the right decision that night. So this happened a few months ago. My best friend P and I had just gotten out of school. We decided to get ice cream after school, and before we know it, it's 6 p.m. We leave the ice cream shop, which happens to be right next to the liquor store. Small city. We notice this shady guy standing outside the store, and we try to brush it off, but there's just something not right about him. A woman leaves the liquor store, and she's dressed nicely in a dress and heels. She starts walking, and before we know it, the guy starts following her. My friend and I get concerned, so we decide to tail him a little bit to make sure he doesn't have any bad intentions. Things escalate when we realize that he's filming this woman and she has no idea. It's disgusting. He's following her and has his phone out, trying to get a better video of what's under her skirt. P and I look at each other and have a mutual understanding. We know we have to do something, so we take a deep breath and somehow manage to put ourselves between the woman and the man. We hear him curse, but we don't dare turn around. We are spread apart, making sure there's no way he can get her on film. Mind you, we're both 5'1", 17-year-old girls. Our hearts are racing, but we don't move away until the woman safely enters a restaurant, which is about 2 blocks away. She's in the restaurant, but this guy does not want to give up. He's waiting outside for her. He's lingering and even tries to peer inside through a window. P and I know we have to tell the woman what's going on, just in case he tries something. So we step inside this fancy restaurant and spot the woman on a date with her boyfriend. Tap her on the shoulder and I fill her in. She's shocked that he followed her for 2 blocks and that she had no idea. I let her know that he's waiting outside and give her his description, just in case he follows her anywhere else. She thanks us profusely and even gives us a hug. P and I leave the restaurant feeling relieved because we both know that we cannot live with ourselves if something were to happen to her. I'm a 22-year-old female and come from the US, but am currently living in Germany for a work study. I am traveling alone, but I am fluent in German and I've always been fairly confident in my ability to live alone and defend myself, considering I stand at about 5'11" and carry 3 different forms of self-defense on me at all times. I've been here for a little over a month and I absolutely love everything about it, besides this experience of course. This happened roughly 3 weeks ago. After exploring my semi-large home city in Germany for a few weeks, I wanted to check out a nearby country. I've always been jealous of how Europeans can travel. Countries like Americans can travel from state to state, and my dad generously offered to pay for my travels while I'm living here. So I wanted to take advantage of that and experience a different culture. After doing lots of research, I decided upon the Netherlands. I've always been curious about Dutch culture, and I was very excited to do some more exploring, even if just for a weekend. I chose a small city in the south of the Netherlands, so I only traveled about 4.5 hours to get there. I had some lovely Dutch food and got to experience the Saturday market in the city center, which was filled with local goods. Now for the juicy part. On my last day in the Netherlands, I decided to check out a local Dutch coffee shop. Most of you probably know, but some Dutch coffee shops sell weed for recreational use and have areas where you can smoke and talk to people. Since I've never been to anything like this before, I was super excited and nervous. I smoke relatively frequently back home, so I wasn't going into this completely blind though. When I walked in, I had to register for an account, and the staff took my picture and passport and gave me an account number. I was a little uneasy about this, considering I didn't want my passport and a coffee club account to go hands in hand, but I've heard that several coffee shops do this, so I wasn't super worried. I then went to the counter and bought the weakest strain they had. White Widow, I think, which is definitely not considered weak in the US. Also, it was like 5 for half a gram, so that was pretty damn fantastic. I didn't want to bring the bud across borders because I didn't want to risk getting torn in half by the German police, so I decided I'd find someone to smoke with and grab a train afterwards. It was only about 1:30 p.m. as I made my way to the chill zone, a hazy room filled with foreigners and locals, all ripping bongs and dragging blunts. Amongst quite a few 20-something-year-old men, I see 2 girls sitting alone at a table for 4, and I ask if I can join. They happily oblige and we start chatting. They introduced themselves as Alex and Jen. Both of them were Germans, and When I mentioned that I'm from the US, they got super excited, started gushing about how awesome California must be, to which I've never even been. Not even after a minute that I'm talking to Alex and Jen, some lanky, freaky looking boy looks over from a different table and says, "Oh, you're from the US? We were just talking about how we wish we could afford to travel there." Immediately after saying this, he sits down across from me, despite the fact that nobody invited him to. Looks-wise, this guy appeared to be anywhere between 25 and 30, relatively scraggly with big hazed-over brown eyes, shaggy brown hair, and a very large mouth, which was always slightly ajar. Though he was slightly unkempt, he seemed relatively normal, despite inviting himself to pop a squat with us. This lurky boy starts asking us normal questions. Where we are from, where we work, how do you like the Netherlands, and stuff. The way he spoke was slightly slurred though, as if he had been drinking, but I couldn't smell alcohol on him, and he didn't seem drunk. He was consistently hard to understand, with an accent that was possibly Dutch. For a moment, I thought he might have a mental disability, so I didn't want to be rude to him and say I couldn't understand him. It also occurred to me that he might just be attempting to flirt and failing miserably, so I didn't really see him as a threat. I mostly nodded at what he said or threw in a yeah for sure, here or there, while Alex and Jen were relatively quiet. Something about him was off-putting to me. I just couldn't figure out what it was. After a few minutes of barely coherent conversation, Alex asks this guy if he can roll us a joint since none of us know how to. He says yes and offers to grind our bud. We give him the go-ahead and he suddenly takes all of it and leaves the chill zone to grind it at the bar. This is where I started to get concerned. Tons of people in the chill zone had grinders right in front of them, and there was no reason for him to leave to grind our weed. I began to worry he might put something in it. Alex and Jen both admit that it freaks them out too, and I decide to keep an eye on him through the glass door, though he had his back to us. I'm closely watching him when he turns around and gives me this wide, toothy smile, almost like he was laughing. I instantly got the chills. He continued to stare directly at me, smiling, as he spent 10 minutes grinding our bud. This guy wanders back in and hands each of us our small bags of bud and then grabs a paper to start rolling. I am not shitting you when I say that he took 30 minutes to roll one loose, horrible joint. His hands were shaking the entire time, almost violently. I started to wonder if he was on something else. The joint immediately falls apart and he asks Alex, who was sitting directly next to him, to lick it and fix it. He's smiling and staring intently at her as she's about to lick it, and she says, "You really don't have to watch me do it, you know." He responds again with some incoherent jibber-jabber as I turn to the girls sitting behind me and ask if they could roll a joint for me. They do so in less than a few minutes. The crappy joint falls apart about 3 more times, and we decide to just smoke the one that the girls rolled, as we all wanted this guy to get the heck away from us at this point. I come up with a half-assed plan as we light it, and I say, "Hey, we appreciate you helping us, but these are my friends that I haven't seen since the last time I was in Germany, and we just really want to catch up and have some girl time." Seems nice enough. He responded with, "Well, you guys can talk with me right here. I don't have to leave." Alex immediately repeats the same thing I said, phrased a bit differently, and he says, "I'm standing here. You can pretend you're alone and just talk with me here." At this point, alarm bells are starting to go off. Stu isn't leaving, and I can't think of anything to say to make him go. Jen has been quiet almost the whole time, staring at the table, but Alex is starting to realize that we really need to do something. Alex says to him, "Please, we don't want to be rude. We just haven't seen each other in so long, and we really want to catch up one-on-one." He aggressively shoots back with, "How did you all meet then? Where did you meet? In what city? Why are all of your friends?" And then directed at me, "Why were you in Germany, and where were you?" Dang. Now I need a real story, or at least one convincing enough to shoo him away. Say something along the lines of, "I was visiting this big city in Germany to find an apartment for my upcoming work study, and I met them in a pub. Started talking, realized we had a lot in common, and decided to stay in touch since I knew I wouldn't have a lot of friends when I moved here. Sounds legit. This guy nods and seems convinced enough. Alex immediately follows with, so can you please go back to your friends so we can talk? He says yet again, I don't need to leave for you all to talk. He then says we should start fresh and asks me and only me what my name is, while extending a shaking hand. Suddenly, every story I've read on here is rushing back to me, and I realize all the things I've done wrong. I told him where I work, live, where I'm from. Man, this isn't good. My name is my last saving grace. I blurt out a fake name. Trisha. He repeats my name, but doesn't tell me his. Now I've reached my limit. We tried being polite, but to no avail. We've spent over an hour dealing with this creepy dude, and we've all had enough of it. I look him dead in the eyes and sternly say, You're making us uncomfortable. Please leave us alone. He leans in until he's only a few inches from my face, his eyes almost quivering, as he says in a quiet, low tone, I know people at your work, people that are above you. You really don't want to mess with me, because I could ruin your life. As he says this, it's as though the slurring in his voice vanishes. I feel the blood draining from my face and my head starts tingling. I almost feel like I'm about to burst into tears or throw up. Maybe both. I grab my bag and say, I'm going to leave. You're seriously making us feel weird and I really don't want to talk to you anymore. And then the final blood-curdling comment from him. I think we'll be on the same train. Now that I know where you live, I think it's time for me to go too. I rush outside in a panic, borderline hyperventilating as Alex and Jen follow suit. We simultaneously say, What the heck, and hurry away from the coffee shop. We end up exchanging numbers and going our separate ways. Now for a slightly happier ending. After I sprinted to the train station, I realized that I had left my pre-marked bag at the coffee shop. I honestly hesitated as I really didn't want to run into this guy again, but I really wanted my useless goodies, so I ran back. I stood outside, briefly explained to the security guard what happened and why I left so quickly, and he said, We saw what happened and we kicked him out. So sorry for that. He's not allowed back here again and handed me my bag. I honestly believe that without Alex and Jen there, things would have gone very differently. I think this dude had some seriously messed up intentions, and the only thing stopping him was the fact that we were all together. I came across this subreddit a few days ago and thought I'd share my experience. This happened to me back in 2005, right after I graduated from uni. I live in a small town near the outskirts of London. It's not creepy or out of the way or anything, but it can get quite deserted at night. The night in question, I and a bunch of mates were going to all get together and go down to Fabric in central London. I was getting ready to leave the house when my girlfriend Sarah called with a bit of a problem, prompting me to tell my friends that they should go on without me and I'll meet them there. I hopped on the bus and headed to hers. A few hours later, I'd helped her sort through her crisis and was thinking I'd better make a move on and head to the club. I asked if she wanted to come. Several times she insisted that she felt better and wanted to stay at home. Knowing better than to test her resolve, I left it at that and called a minicab. I was waiting for the cab at the front of the driveway when Sarah joined me for the wait. We were kissing when the car drove up. This was my first sign that something was wrong. We didn't hear him pull up because he was driving really slowly with the headlights off. The only reason he grabbed our attention was because he turned on his bright lights at us. It was an old cream-colored Mercedes station wagon. I ignored whatever apprehension I had because I thought I just had an overactive imagination. Okay, so he pulled up quietly. So what? Knowing what I do now, I'm so happy Sarah never agreed to come with me. I got in the cab and told a guy who was in his mid-40s that I wanted to head to Fabric in central London. He just nodded his head while looking into his driver's side wing mirror. I said, "Did you hear me, mate?" He nods again, this time also letting a yes slip out. "That's quite a fare," he said, all the while staring at the window. That's when I realized what he was staring at in his mirror. Sarah walking back up to the driveway. I was about to react when she got to the front door, but the cabbie beat me to it, turning and saying, "Can't have the little lady going on unescorted now, can we?" All manner of deviance out there. This threw me a bit as his whole behavior was off, but I also knew that's what I would have done had it been the other way around, and maybe this guy had kids himself. I decided to just talk to him, break the ice, and after about 5 minutes I felt at ease as we slipped into a familiar conversation. Football and women. It was all okay until he started telling me about his ex and best friends, how they had been hooking up behind his back, about how he kicked the ever-living shit out of his friend for it. Then he started fixating on his ex, saying how all women were whores and liars and were only out for themselves, that men are only there to pay off their debts and wants. He even tried to justify a time when he kicked the shit out of her, saying that men can't be excused for their actions if appropriately provoked. Then it got even weirder. He started talking to me about men, trans men, how he liked that they were the best of both worlds, that they were something he could fuck, but that they were also wired like men and not out to get you. Those she-men are tighter than a twisted screw. I like it when they bleed a little on my you-know-what. Though some ladies are mighty fine, like that ass of yours. He turned to stare at me through the mirror, almost testing my reaction. I'm man enough to say that I was freaking the heck out by this point, not only at the conversation, but at the fact that the mobile phone I'd forgotten to charge, it died halfway through his rant. Not one to show my fear, I asked him to stop off at an ATM so I could get cash out to pay him at the end of the journey. He agrees, and for a moment I feel like it's all going to be over in a second, when he says that before he does that, he needs to stop to take a piss. That's even better, I thought. I can sneak out when he's peeing and bolt off. He turned off the main road and went through a random residential area before we finally found ourselves going down a dirt road and heading towards the woods. Mate, where the heck are we going? You can't take a pee anywhere, he replied, somewhere along the lines that it was safer in the woods. That's when I noticed it. This particular car had no unlock feature in the back, and a very quiet slow tug on the door handle revealed that the child lock was on. I was trapped. He stopped the car near the edge of the woods and turned and asked if I wanted to join him. I declined and said that I was in a hurry and asked him to hurry himself. This seemed to anger him and he slammed the door and vanished. I waited about 1 minute and tried to climb out the driver's side, but it was locked too, and I was scared that my movement had alerted the cabbie just outside. Having tried and failed to restart my phone, I looked around to see if he'd left a phone or some kind of device that I could communicate with, but nothing. After nearly 10 minutes had gone by, I worked myself up to smashing the windows, figuring that this was in no way a normal situation and that abnormal measures could be taken. Just as I was getting into position, I heard a loud crash. It sounded like a massive branch had just hit the leaves below. I froze, not moving a muscle, not even my lungs. I wanted to be able to hear everything just at that moment. As my ears slowly tuned in, I began to hear two very distinct sounds, but both in intervals. The first was a rustling sound, but it wasn't the wind. It sounded more like birds flying through the trees all at once. The second was a squelching slam. The slam only occurred 3 times, whereas the rustling was quite often. Then silence again. I decided not to wait any longer. My imagination was going wild as to what those sounds were, and I just wanted to get away as fast as my legs could carry me. I used to be on the track team. I leaned back and thrust my legs out as hard as I could and kicked the backseat window through. It shattered and I wasted no time in shimmying through the broken window and outside. That's when it happened. My eyes focused in the dark and I began to see that the ground was littered all around me with clothes. Children's clothes, and the odd toy. I was so busy looking around that I didn't notice him walk straight up to me from behind and grab me by the nape. He was obviously way stronger than me. Where are you going, friend? I still need to take you down Central. I noticed his shirt was off. He was sweating profusely and was covered in dirt. And in his hands he had a knife. A full-on kitchen knife, and there was something on it. I said, "What the heck, man? What the heck are you doing?" He replied something to the effect that he had some foul traps out in the woods and was checking on them for game. He offered to show me, recognizing that if I went with him, it would probably be the last choice I make. I twisted my body as much as I could and punched him square in the face. I ran as fast as I could. He yelled after me, "See you soon." I ignored him and kept running. Even though we had driven quite far, at least 5 or 6 miles, I still legged it all the way back and straight to the cops and told them everything I remembered. They said they could go and check it out and send me home in a squad car. The next morning, I called Sarah and went over right away to check on her. I still wasn't over the way the creepy cabbie had been staring at her, and since he had picked me up from hers, he knew where she lived. I told her the whole story. When I was done, she just stared at me in disbelief, not sure what to say, and hugged me. At that point, the police rang and I went outside to take the call. They told me that they went to check the specific area I mentioned, finding none of the clothes or toys I said I had seen. Neither was there any sign of foul traps or a knife. They did mention finding a few pieces of cut up rope, but with nothing to go on, they just insinuated I was having a laugh at their expense. I then called the minicab company, figuring I could at least lodge a complaint against the wacko. The idea that this could have provoked him didn't enter my head at the time. They said they had no record of a car picking me up that night. One had been sent, but by the time it arrived, nobody was waiting. This creeped me out all over again. How had he found me then? Was it random? Was I chosen? Could he have been listening in to their private car radio network or something? I left Sarah's and headed back to mine, and she was going to join me after helping her mom do some chores, and I wanted to go chill for a while. I should mention at this point that Sarah and I are now happily married, going on 8 years, and that all is well. However, that day, after I got home from hers and took a shower, I wandered off to the window. What I saw sent a chill down my spine, and still does whenever I think about it. I saw it, that cream-colored Mercedes station wagon, and the crazy cabbie staring at me with such a cold, empty look on his face, until he slowly smiled and drove off. He told me I'd see him again. He wanted me to see him, wanted me to know that he could find me when he wanted. I still don't understand how he followed me or what his intentions were, and I have never told Sarah about this last incident. About a year later, I took out a loan and moved me and Sarah. We were engaged at that point, to another part of the country, and my parents followed soon after. Over the years, I've pondered what he was going to do, where he wanted to lead me, what the noises were, and how he had found me when he must have stopped to clean up the spot in the woods, but most of all, why he even picked me up that night. I suppose I should be happy it was me and not some other poor victim who might not have reacted as I did, but just in case, crazy cabbie, let's not meet. This happened some years back when I was in my last year of schooling. I was on a bus on the way to school when I happened to look up and met eyes with this guy. It happened by chance, so I quickly averted my eyes and disembarked the bus. From then on, I would have frequent chance encounters with him. My course happened to be on the same floor as another course, but on different sections of the building with the elevators in the middle. I would see him everywhere, in the corridors, at the elevator, etc. It weirded me out because he would attempt to say hi and smile at me. I didn't know him and have never seen him ever, so I would ignore him. Turns out he was studying at the course opposite mine. I chalked it up to coincidence, but still felt extremely uncomfortable. Told my friends about it, and they told me that the guy had some extremely disturbing violent tendencies, and had maybe even stalked other female students. Understandably, I freaked the heck out. The climax came one morning when I went to my classroom, which was really a project room for the final year students. I arrived late as always and went about setting up my station. The room is supposed to be locked and only accessible by a key card, but we keep the door propped open. All the desks are shielded with tall partitions in. Mine was shielded from the windows. Suddenly, the weird guy came into my classroom and went towards my table. He didn't even belong in this section of the building. Also, how did he know exactly where I sat if my desk was shielded from view? He saw me and I saw him, and I hurriedly attempted to feign sleep in hopes of chasing him away. He approached my table with a shoebox in his hands and asked why I was on the table and if I wasn't feeling well. My friend awkwardly told him that we were working. My friends were in a corner watching a variety show and laughing, obviously not working. He said he had something to give me. I stayed silent and continued pretending to be asleep. This lasted until he awkwardly went away. Later on, as I related this to my friends from the other course, they told me that he was extremely protective about the box and was extremely threatening to people in his class. Went something along the lines of, If you look, I'll kill you. Problem was, nobody expressed interest in the box and the threat was unprovoked, so they got curious and peeked into the box to find that it contained dead flowers. How would he feel the need to pick dead flowers and gift them to me in a shoebox? I felt extremely unsafe and uncomfortable and insisted my friends accompany me everywhere until it felt safe enough. The strange guy also never appeared again. This happened a few months ago. The context required it. At this point in time, I had just picked my mental health back up after an extremely traumatic non-consensual episode. You can guess what. And was still struggling with chronic inability to say no to people. I'm a 21-year-old gay trans man, and while I never had trouble passing, I'm still seen as very pretty and young looking. So I was at a young people's event at my place of worship, which is completely accepting of all sorts of new people, by the way. It was a lovely evening. I met a lot of great people, got a bit tipsy and had a great time. That is, until around 12:45 to 1 a.m. when things were starting to wind up. I went upstairs and met a man, looked approximately in his late 30s, called Tobias. Tobias was quite forward, complimenting my appearance, being familiar, asking about my sexuality, so I guessed that he was interested, but I didn't feel the same way. My place of worship has always been a safe place for me, so I assumed if I didn't flirt back, he would get the message. Shortly after, I went downstairs to put something in the bin and he followed me. When we were alone, he kissed me. I pulled away and told him, "Sorry, I'm not available." He said, "Don't worry, neither am I," and gestured to his wedding ring. I laughed it off, turned, and walked back upstairs. And as we walked, Tobias told me, "I can't believe I just did that." Nothing happened. That didn't just happen. I nodded and thought that was that. The evening was getting late. I decided to get home. I offered to walk a friend of mine to the station, and when she left to go to the bathroom, he asked where I was going. I said firmly, "I'm going to walk my friend to the station, and then I'm going home." She returned, and as we left, he decided to come along with us. I asked where he was headed. He said, "Oh, I'll go to the station for you." I reiterated that I was going straight home from that point. Along the way, my friend wanted to get another drink and hang out, and I agreed. We were chatting and all seemed friendly, but I was becoming increasingly uncomfortable with Tobias's behavior. He was constantly complimenting me, telling me I was amazing, special, and not like anyone he'd ever met, and even kept touching me, putting his hands on my neck and down the back of my skirt, still trying to kiss me. FYI, this is a tactic called love bombing, I think, and it is a big ol' red flag. He commented on some hickeys I had. Who was that? Whoever it was. You think they're better than me? Really better than me? You let a boy do that to you? I told him that it was someone I had known for a long time and reminded him that I wasn't single. He had kissed me around 4 times up to this point, and when he did, I would pull away, try and put distance between us, move my head so he wouldn't, laugh awkwardly, and say, "We are in a shop. Please don't. I'm not what you're looking for. You don't know me," etc. This man straight up tried to make out with me 1 meter away from some poor shopkeeper serving us. Squeezed my waist and commented on how skinny and small I was. Asked me how old I was and commented, "Wow, you look so young." He asked me if I was attracted to him and I shrugged, shook my head and said, "Sorry, I'm very into the person I'm with and I can't even look at anyone else when I have someone." At this point, I should have told him to screw off. In fact, I should have said that a long time before this. But when it's actually happening, it's surprisingly difficult to get a bearing on when you can start being rude. Which is exactly what people who behave like this rely on. A vulnerable person's fear of making a scene. Or else they actually believe that this behavior means the person wants to be persuaded. We all decided to sit on a bench as all the pubs were shut. Sat on the end and my friend was next to me. Tobias whined that I wasn't sitting next to him. My friend asked why that mattered and he said, "Oh, you know, because I want him to." Never mind, I'm being too much. I'm going too far. I tried to steer the conversation away from him flirting, but he kept standing and walking to where I was sitting to kiss me, crouching by me and putting his hands on my knees. He didn't want to tell us how old he was because he was afraid I wouldn't like him, but did eventually confess he was 37. In an attempt to stop him being interested in me, I revealed that I was transgender, and he put his hand up my shirt, saying, "Wow, you really think I would judge you for that? You have no idea who I am. I see you." Side note, what is this, the Avatar? I would never care. I would still do everything with you. He meant sexually, by the way. I wiggled away as far as I was able and said something along the lines of, "Well, thank you, but I'm not interested." My friend had somehow misread the situation as me enjoying this behavior, probably because I'm a bloke. I texted another friend to call me so that I could get 5 minutes away from the situation, walked up the street, explained everything and made a plan, which was a really good idea, talking out loud about it. I finally registered that this wasn't right, that I was totally in the right to be uncomfortable and wanted to get the heck out. I returned and told everyone that I was going home. The second I came back, he tried to kiss me and told me he was worried and had tried to come looking for me. I moved my head so he couldn't and told him, "Please don't, I'm going home." I texted the friend I was with help, and she immediately started saying that we were going home. He should go home too, and she and I were leaving together now. He asked me, "What's changed? You've come back different. Who are you talking to? What's going on?" I told him, "I'm uncomfortable and I'm going home now." He said, "What are you talking about? Have I made you uncomfortable?" "Yes, I'm going home now." To this point, I can definitely see that my lack of rudeness and conflict avoidance tactics had actually made the situation much worse and given him the impression that I could be persuaded to do whatever he wanted, or somehow would let him on. So now that I've been absolutely crystal clear, he should back off, right? "Wrong," he said. "Wow, who are you talking to? What's happened? Whoever it is, don't throw this away. I know we had a connection. You're special." Said, "I only met you this evening. You made me feel uncomfortable, and you should ask before you kiss people." Wow, I can't believe this. You're trying to turn this around on me. "I know you're drunk, it's fine. I just want to go home now." "Oh, I'm completely sober. I'm not drunk." At this point, my friend stepped in and tried to assure him everything was fine and convince him to leave. He asked me for another kiss, and I shook my head. "No, thank you," he said. "Don't throw this away," and tried to touch my face. I reiterated, "I met you this evening. I don't know you. I want to go home." He said, "Can I at least have a hug?" And immediately tried to hug me. Pushed him away and said, "I would rather not." He said, "Wow, you're making me feel uncomfortable now." I said I would rather not. Please respect my boundaries. I want to go home." My friend again tried to get him to go home. He said, "No, you're making me feel like I've done something wrong. I just want a hug." "Oh, I know what this is. You're just not used to people accepting you for who you are. You can't handle that I accept you and see you for who you are." "I mean, really?" I said, "That's not the case. I have plenty of people who accept me, but you've made me feel uncomfortable and I'm going home." At this point, I was stood up, backed against the edge of the bench with him standing barely a foot away. I had started shaking because I was feeling anxious, so I just walked away up the street. My friend stayed with him, convincing him to go home. He didn't follow us. I took her to the station and got myself into an Uber. The next day, I handed a report very similar to this to the security at my place of worship, and the dude was promptly barred from entry. I hope people can see the mechanisms of how this situation was set up and can find competence to be more outspoken than I was, because by being polite, I made the situation worse. I know it's not my fault, but I'm very grateful that I'm not timid like I used to be, and now I'm able to absolutely be firm, and if need be, rude about setting my boundary. Therapy is a hell of a drug, and it's doing me wonders. This story happened to me around 6 months ago. I've lived where I lived for 3 years. It's a nice apartment in an amazing location, but they were built in the late 90s. The last few years, the city I live in has had a massive population boom and people have been non-stop pouring in. Good weather, amazing economy, and cool place to do stuff always. Because of this, I have seen the landlord staff start to do heavy maintenance on the apartments to bring them up to date to attract more people to them. My neighbor lived in his apartment for something like 6 years before he ended up buying a house and moved. When he moved, the landlord immediately started redoing his apartment as one to bring up to date. The way that the apartment layout is, There are two stories. Where my bedroom is, on the direct other side of the bedroom wall, is the staircase in my neighbor's apartment. The way my bedroom layout has my bed right up against that wall. They were completely stripping this place clean. It was one of the first ones that they did such heavy remodeling to. For weeks, I would always see the workers over there painting and redoing the floors. A few days before this happened were no different. I left and saw them doing maintenance on the kitchen, and when I came home from work, they were gone for the day. Nothing unusual, not a single bit. The part that is unusual is what happened one particular night. I was awake around 1 a.m. watching TV in my room when I heard somebody on the other side of the wall slowly walking up the stairs and very obviously stopping halfway up. Where the person was stopping was directly where my head lay on the other side of the wall. I could feel him listening to me breathing. I immediately turned the TV sound off and sat there extremely quiet and still. I heard nothing for a few minutes, and then after what felt like an absolute eternity, I heard the person start walking the rest of the stairs to the second floor. My survival instinct kicked in instantly. It was very obvious that somebody was on the other side of that wall listening to me. I also knew that it was only a few days before this happened that I saw the maintenance redoing that apartment's kitchen. I knew that there was no way somebody already moved in that fast. I obviously couldn't see if there was movement in there from the window, but I had a good angle to see if anybody walked out. I sat there for about 15 minutes just staring outside to see if I saw anything at all. Nothing. I went back into my room and laid down in bed again. I didn't play the TV, just sat there waiting to hear something again. I was messing around on my phone for about 20 minutes in silence until I heard movement of the stairs again. This time though, the movement didn't start from the top or the bottom. The movement started in the middle of the staircase, meaning that the entire time I was sitting there in silence, this person was just on the other side of the wall listening to my every move. This terrified me, so I called the police. I gave them all the information of what was going on, and they informed me somebody would be out very soon. I went back to one room and watched out the window again. Only a few moments later, a police car pulled up and a cop got out to examine the building and apartment. He was looking around and shining his light in the windows. I heard him knock on the door and shortly after, could hear him talking to somebody but couldn't make out what they were saying. I was totally puzzled by this. The officer walked over to my door and knocked. I went downstairs and he informed me very nicely that somebody just moved in there. I laughed and was completely embarrassed. I even said to the cop that it was a heck of a way to meet your new neighbor. I felt embarrassed, but more importantly, felt very relieved about the entire situation. I brushed off the whole thing as just being late and my mind playing massive tricks on me. The next day, I went to leave my apartment when I saw something that made me stop dead in my tracks. I went outside and only took a few steps towards my car when I saw maintenance over there carrying out the old refrigerator. I was puzzled. I walked over to the apartment and I looked in the door that was wide open. The kitchen was still being worked on and not a single piece of furniture could be seen. I was legitimately speechless. I walked over to a maintenance man and said, "Didn't somebody move in here?" And he informed me no, and that the apartment wouldn't be ready for showings until at least 3 weeks. I ran back upstairs into my apartment and called my landlord. I asked her if somebody was staying there and she said absolutely not. Told her about what I experienced the night before and she was floored. She told me that they would change that apartment's locks immediately. She also suggested that I call the non-emergency line to the police department and inform them that nobody lives there. I did just that, and they asked me to come down to the station. I told them all the information in detail of what happened. They were able to quickly figure out what officer came out to check out the situation, so he could help identify the person who answered the door. The officer described the man in detail, and I confirmed that I have never seen him around the apartments before. There was a search around town for a few weeks, until the whole thing just sort of fizzled out, and I stopped hearing about it and started seeing fewer and fewer patrol cars randomly in the parking lot. After that night, I never heard anything in that apartment. Around a month later, an older couple moved in and they were very nice. When I saw the moving van pull up, I went to introduce myself to them, but to be completely honest, the only reason I went out there was to see if any of them matched the description of who the cops saw. Not even close. I'm certain that the person who was in that apartment got away with it. I had an extremely hard time sleeping the following weeks after that happened to me. I actually ended up moving my bed into the smaller second bedroom because it bothered me so much. I have zero idea what the intentions of this person were or what he was doing on that staircase, but it's easily one of the most chilling things that's ever happened to me. So, random man that's listening to me sleep, let's not meet again. I'll start out by saying that I'm not a writer by any means. I suck at it, but I will try my best. For a bit of backstory, my mom was dating an abusive prick at this time. We'll call him Ian. Because of Ian and the crazy fights they had gotten into, we couldn't lock up my house at all. He had kicked in both the front and back door to the house, and they were never fixed. My mother and Ian were at the bar all day, every day. I told you this so you know why the house wasn't locked up and where my parents were when this happened. This incident occurred when I was around 12 years old and my little brother was around 10. I was a pretty smart girl at this age, and my brother was sick all the time, so he was very tiny and frail. My mother and Ian were at the bar as usual. When you opened my front door, it put you in the living room and you could see the back door. There was a hallway to the right that led back into the bedrooms, and that is where my brother and I were. We were in his bedroom with the door closed, playing something on the PlayStation. It was around midnight or 1 a.m. and we were playing and having a good time when I heard a weird noise. My brother didn't hear it and I didn't want to creep him out. I told him that I wanted to get a drink and told him to stay in the room and I would bring him something. To get to my kitchen, you would have to walk down the hallway in front of both the front and back doors because it was behind the living room. Kept hearing strange noises, so before I left out of my brother's room, I told him to get into the closet and work on our fort so that it would be ready when I was done getting our drinks and a snack. I raised my little brother for the most part and took care of him. I had a terrible feeling, a sense of dread. I could tell something wasn't right, and this was a way to get my brother to hide without scaring him. He frightened easily and had really bad asthma attacks, and at this time we had no inhaler or his breathing treatment machine for him. Good going, Ma. I knew if he started having an asthma attack on top of being scared, it wouldn't be pretty. Anyways, I left the back room and decided to see what was going on, because I was such a badass at 12 years old, but I had to protect my little brother. Started sneaking up the hallway as slowly and quietly as I could. I was terrified. I could feel that something was wrong. Before I made it to the end of the hallway, I heard a man. It sounded like he was growling. It was a deep, terrifying noise. Can't explain it, but the feeling that washed over me damn near made me puke. So I, of course, freeze. I have no one in this town. I don't know anyone, and my dad is living in a different state. My mom is at the bar drunk as heck. I was sitting there trying to gather the courage to see what was around the corner and going over my options when I heard my brother's door open. He sees me and the look on my face and freezes. I remember his eyes going so wide with fear because he must have heard the growl or whatever it was too. I motioned to him with my hands to go back in the room and he does. I gathered the courage to peek around the corner and what I saw still freaks me out to this day. It was horrifying. I saw a man probably around 6'6" and 300 pounds, sitting on my couch with a wicked grin on his face. That grin and the look in his eyes will forever be burned into my head. By some stupid luck, the man didn't see me. I slowly, so slowly snuck back to my brother's room. I slowly shut the door and started going over my options. My little brother was already, of course, horrified because of the growling noise this man was making. I'm so thankful that he wasn't the one who saw what was out there. I mustered my brave big sister face and calmly told him that there was a man that I didn't know on the couch and he needed to be very quiet and I needed him to be brave and keep his breathing in check. My little brother adored me and looked up to me, so when I told him that I needed him to be brave, he tried his best. I told him not to move and he didn't. The first thing I tried was the window, but it wouldn't budge. It was completely stuck. I'm making myself stay calm for my brother's sake, but I know what's sitting out there. So since the window was stuck, I decided to start looking for a weapon. My older brother lived here and I know he had swords somewhere. I don't remember where he was. As I'm looking for a weapon, I hear the man sing, "I know you're here." Man, my stomach knotted up. The hair on the back of my neck rose, and I instantly got a cold sweat. And then I hear it. My little brother had started wheezing. Asthma attack. I hugged him, reminded him about being brave, and told him to sit still and focus on his breathing. I started frantically trying to get my window open, but it was stuck. I looked around and started moving blankets when I found my older brother's cell phone that he always forgot. I remember thinking that I was lucky and felt a bit of relief. I immediately called the police and told them what was happening, hysterical at this point but still remaining quiet. The dispatcher told me to remain on the phone so she could hear what was happening when the man started banging on our bedroom door. It had been about 5 minutes into the phone call when this happened, and I could no longer remain calm. I lost it. I started screaming. I mean, like a blood-curdling scream. The kind that would send chills down your spine if you heard it. I forgot to mention that our bedroom had the only working lock, so the door was locked. He was trying to get in and banging on the door. His banging got louder and louder. He was screaming to let him in when it went completely silent. Then he did the creepiest, most terrifying thing ever. He started laughing. You know I could just bust down this door in about 2 seconds, right, little girl? Tap, tap, tap. Now he's lightly knocking on the door and asking for me to open it. His demeanor completely changed. I then heard a scraping at the door. What I had imagined it was in my 12-year-old head was he was scraping the door with his really long fingernails or something. But that wasn't the case. Then I hear the police start screaming at him to get on the ground, put his hands up, etc. I heard him putting up a fight, followed by more yelling and eventually silence. After a few minutes there was a knock on my door, but at this point I was too terrified to open it. I thought that this nightmare guy was still there, so being in my hysterical state, I started screaming, "No, no, no, please," over and over again. I couldn't stay brave for my little brother anymore. I was on the floor holding him this whole time, convinced that we were going to die. Eventually I calmed myself a bit, and this time a female officer was at the door, so I opened it. There were about 5 cops standing in the hallway listening to me being hysterical. I refused to let go of my brother at this point, but we both ran to this female officer and just collapsed. We had been so scared. It turns out this guy was completely wasted and high on drugs. I remember the cops walking me up to him and having me stand in front of him to ask me if I knew this man. I didn't, but I'll never forget standing in front of this huge man, looking into his brown eyes that were completely bloodshot and filled with hatred. I'll never forget that growling noise that he was making, or the look of pure horror in my little brother's eyes. My parents were called and investigated for leaving us alone like that and for the doors being like that. My mom is a different person now. She doesn't drink and is now married to a cop. She has completely changed. I remember asking her about it later on, and she told me something that I didn't know. The man had a huge knife, so that's what he was scraping the door with. And he also had some rope, tape, and a tarp. I still don't know how he didn't get to us, or why he didn't just bust down the door to get us. It would have taken one half-ass kick from him to kick down the door. It was super thin. It creeps me out still, and I have had nightmares from it. My husband doesn't understand why I get so furious with him when he leaves the door unlocked at night. I work 3rd shift, so I'll come home and the door will be unlocked. It's infuriating because I then have to go through every room in the house and check the closets and the other places that a person could hide. I have 2 kids and they will never ever go through what I did. Sorry for my shitty writing style, but I wanted to tell my story after lurking here for so long. Back in my younger days, when I was still living with roommates, I had what turned out to be the most obvious of dangerous encounters. I was looking to move and I was about to leave to see a place in the perfect location with a good price, and 2 seemingly professional male roomies. At the last minute, my boyfriend suggested that he goes along because the place is nearby and they'll have to meet him at some point anyways. We get there and I introduce myself, and the one roommate seems a little taken aback at the fact that I had somebody with me. I suppose it could be seen as unusual to bring your boyfriend, but I figured, oh well, the damage has already been done. If they don't allow me to be their roommate simply because he's with me, I can't do anything about it now. Let's just see the place. The apartment is huge. We're both suitably impressed until we turn the corner of the living room and we see it. The two cameras set up with a light pointed at the couch. There's a guy sitting on the couch who is introduced as the other roommate. He jumps off of the couch and gives my boyfriend the same weird look. I now realize the look they were giving was disappointment. I shoot my boyfriend a very quick look of understanding, but we silently decide to continue with the tour so as to not escalate the situation. I casually joke that it's nice to have a camera so I can videotape myself for my auditions. They both laugh much too hard and say, "Yeah, that's what we were doing." He brings us over to my room and it's literally a broom closet. You wouldn't even be able to fit a single-sized bed in there. It's now patently obvious that there was never a room for rent in the first place. I take this opportunity to get out there by saying, "Oh, that's too bad. I have a queen bed and I won't be able to fit." "Okay, well, thanks for your time." We get out to the street and walk around the corner without saying a word. When we finally look at each other, it's in this stunned silence. He just hugged me really tight and we went for a walk in the park.